Good morning, this is Doreen App. I'm just testing to see if anyone can hear me.
Good morning, Doreen.
Good.
Doreen,
Yes,
Doreen, can you hear anything?
yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Oh, there she is. We can't hear you, your audio.
Okay,
Good morning.
I just sent her an email.
Can you try saying something, Doreen?
yes. So I can hear you perfectly.
No sound yet.
Oh, you did? Okay. No, that's probably a smart one. It's easy. I brought my own. Okay. Last item morning. I saw the email last time. Yeah, I guess.
We're not muted. Can you go ahead and mute?
Can you hear me now?
Enter your meeting ID followed by pound. Enter your participant ID followed by pound. Otherwise, you have entered the meeting as a panelist. Attendees can now hear you speak. This meeting is being
Okay, can you hear me now? Hello? 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 Can anyone hear me now?
Hi, Doreen. I can hear you on YouTube separately, but we're not hearing you here in the room. And so we're trying to troubleshoot to see if it's something on our end. So
Okay.
just so you know, you are streaming live on YouTube. So, and I can hear you through there. We're just trying to troubleshoot here in the room.
Okay. I'm going to step away for just a second because I want to make some adjustments to my setup. So I'll be back in just a second.
How about now, Doreen? Can you hear us okay? All right, we still can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you may have to sign out of Zoom and sign back in and see if that, because we're unable to diagnose what's going on here in the room.
Okay, if you'll.
But I think your microphone's working because we can hear it on the YouTube stream and we just can't hear it in the room here. And we've gone through all of our settings and everything should be working in here.
Okay, let me give it one more shot. I'll be right back.
But just working on some technical issues this morning and then we'll kick off the meeting.
Okay, can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
See, there's this.
Okay, I can hear you.
All right.
Testing.
See, there's something. It's the room's not broadcasting because I could hear her through my laptop on the Zoom. No, we are. Don't really want to. We need to get going with the meeting because. Yeah, send an email to IT. So it's on our end. But I know we can't restart that because we'll have to restart the entire meeting. We'll get through my presentation and then maybe we can take a break and a recess and we'll figure out if we can reset the system. All right. Okay.
Okay, I call to order the Yamhill County Budget Committee for Monday, May 1st, 2023. It is 9:09. And we will start off with the election of officers. The first position that we need to appoint is the chair of the Budget Committee. And do I have any nominations for chair?
I would nominate Jason Fields.
I'd second that.
Okay. Okay, the nominee is Jason Fields for Chair of the Budget Committee. Is there any further discussion?
None.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign.
Doreen said aye.
Thank you. Jason, you are officially the chair. I think that means you have to take over from now. Do you have the agenda?
You're welcome.
So now you have to. appoint a secretary.
All right, it looks like we've got to appoint a secretary. Do I have a nomination? Not, yes.
I nominate Kit Johnston for secretary.
I'll second that.
All right. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Doesn't look like anybody's saying no.
Right.
So
Doreen said aye.
congratulations, Kit.
Congratulations, kid.
That means you have to take all the notes.
Yep.
Not really, but.
So it looks like we're gonna do the budget briefing with Kenneth
Item
Hopper.
three, item three.
Oh, excuse me, missed it. Consideration of approval of the following minutes, May 2nd, 2022.
Chair, I move approval of the minutes from May 2nd of 2022.
Okay, all in favor?
Do we need a second?
No.
Do we need further discussion? I don't know. We're learning together.
Yes, there you go.
Has everyone reviewed the minutes?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So is it approved?
Call for the vote.
Call for the vote. Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, looks like it's approved. Budget briefing by Kenneth Huffer, County Administrator. Jody.
All right, thank you very much. Let me do a share screen here. All right, good morning, commissioners, budget committee members. Welcome to another year of the budget adoption process. Doreen's joining us virtually, and our apologies. We'll get the sound worked out. When we get a break, we're going to have to probably reset the system. So hopefully we'll be able to hear at some point in the room here. Let's see, some quick housekeeping items, just so everyone knows. We have coffee and snacks here in the back of the room. We also have the Oak Room, which is a conference room just around the corner, across from the assessor's office, available for, that's where lunches will be delivered. And it's just a place that when we're on breaks, if you want to get some water or have a seat, or, you know, there is that spot there as well. Let's get myself organized here. So number one, as far as kicking off again, I want to express my appreciation to Denny, Jason, and Doreen for participating again this year on the budget committee. It's a very critical role of probably one of the most important things that we do each year is adopt our annual budget. And so you being able to take time out of your very busy schedules to join us and help us with this process. You know, couldn't thank you more, you know, enough for all the help and time that you put into this. I know over the next 3 days, we're going to have a lot of discussions. We're going to go over a lot of numbers and a lot of these things that the budget team and I are used to looking at. But for most folks, this is you know, you look at it once a year, or it's something that you may be looking at for the first time. And I know it's a lot of information to digest and comprehend and then discuss on Wednesday. So if you have any questions, or if anything comes up, or if we're speaking too quickly through a subject, please stop us and ask the questions, because again, we want to make sure that everyone here is fully informed on what's included in this proposed budget. And then also in the interest, because we are streaming this live on YouTube as well, that members of the public also have an interest in understanding how we put together our budget and what's included in there. Before I get too far, I also want to be sure that I thank all of our department heads who've been working since January and doing a lot of budget development and budget entry. The budget team, Justin, Mike, myself, we've been working on this since October, starting to do some of the preliminary work early in the process. And I especially want to recognize Carolina and Nicole for all of their assistance in getting all of this set up and ready, whether it's the meals, the food, getting the meetings set up, keeping the minutes, keeping me organized, keeping me on time. Couldn't do it without their assistance and support. So I definitely want to recognize them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to try to go quick because I know we start getting into department presentations at 10 o'clock. And so I do have, as with each year as the budget officer, I've prepared a budget message to present to the committee. You're going to see a lot of similar slides that you've seen in prior years, updated with information that relates to the upcoming budget year. So again, I like to put this in here. What is the budget? It's our financial plan for the next fiscal year. We operate on a July 1 fiscal year. So this budget starts July 1, 2023 through June 30, 2024. This budget is critical. If we don't adopt a budget, we won't be able to deliver services come July 1, 2023. So that's why we have a very involved and lengthy process to get it from draft through all the public participation portions of the budget to final adoption in June. So this is one part of getting us one step closer to make sure that we're able to deliver services come July 1. Everything that we're following as far as a process and how the budget's been put together is subject to Oregon local budget law, which is ORS Chapter 294. If you have questions about that, please let me know. And then as far as the calendar and what our process looks like, again, our budget team starts working on some of the preliminary information in October and into November. We have a work session with the Board of Commissioners in December, which we set the discretionary allocation for the next fiscal year. And then we also adopt budget instructions. A copy of those budget instructions are available on the website. And then for all budget committee members, you'll find at the back of your binder is those budget instructions. The budget instructions tell departments what to budget for insurance, what to budget for transfers, what to budget, there's all kinds of instructions for internal transfers. And so it gives them the numbers on what they should be forecasting when they're building personnel lines and transfer lines. So the budget instructions were adopted by the board in January. And then also in January, I issue those budget instructions to the department heads. And that really kicks off a month long of building budgets and getting them entered into the system. In February and March, our budget team, we do an administrative review of all the budgets and make corrections and help departments get ready for this presentation that they're going to be doing over the next 3 days. And of course, May, we have the budget committee. We have a hearing scheduled for tonight, like we do every year at 5:30 to hear requests and then also to receive comments on the budget. There's 2 opportunities to provide comment on the budget tonight at 5:30. And then again in June, once we finish budget committee meetings this week and the budget committee votes to approve the proposed budget, that now becomes a recommended budget. And then we schedule a hearing in June where the Board of Commissioners conduct a hearing on the recommended budget. And then we start taking the steps necessary to actually adopt the budget prior to June 30. So as you can see, it's a pretty extensive and lengthy process to get us from draft to final adoption. All right, before we get too far into my budget message, some important notes, some changes that we had for this year. Most notably is our Oracle Cloud ERP project. This was something that was initiated 2 years ago. I'm looking at Mike. 2 years ago is when we really kicked off the project. The project rolls out in 3 different phases. There's an ERP, which is the finance and accounting phase. That went live in July of last year. The next one it's called EPM. It's really the budget module that went live in January. So the budgets that you're going to see and what's going to be presented to you is what was developed and built in the new budget module that we're all still learning. So nothing like building a budget and learning a new system at the same time. And then the final phase, which is another large phase, is the HR or the HCM phase. And we're anticipating that we're going to be going live with that later this spring, and July, I believe, is our target date that we'll be live with the HR. The HR portion is all the human resources, personnel, payroll, all of those functions for the county. One of the challenges that we did have with this year with budget is one of the new things that we have with this new budget system is the budget system interfaces directly with both the ERP and the HCM. So the fact that HCM, the HR portion, hasn't gone live yet, we had to apply a workaround to get all that workforce data, all that personnel data into these budgets. And that presented some challenges over the anybody who's been through any type of software conversion and having to deal with data conversion and getting things from an old system. Because again, Oracle ERP system is replacing our current system, GEMS, which the county's been using since 1996. So we have dated, even though it's been updated over the years, but getting all that data out of GEMS and into the new system and getting that into the budget. So you may see some things as we're going through here that's going to look a little bit different in our budget presentation. If you have we'll be sure to call those out if there's certain personnel lines or something you see historical information and now it's blank and the salaries being accounted for. That's because we're doing a lot of data cleanup with HR and HCM to make sure it actually corresponds with the correct classification code and it corresponds in the budget. So there's a lot of work that's happening, and that's more behind the scenes with our team. And it's just added to the joy of putting together this budget. The other thing I would call out for those who have been through several budget adoption processes, and are used to seeing our general ledger codes, they changed with the implementation of the new system. And so it's a new numbering that applies there that even I'm still to this day struggling to adapt to the new language. I'm so used to 1002 being 1002. And I have another slide that I'll break down so it provides an explanation on what you're seeing in the GL code. So if you have any questions about that, or if it gets confusing, or if departments, or if I jump back into the old general ledger lingo and I'm losing anyone, just raise your hand and I'll be sure we get back on track and we're using the numbers to make it easier to call out which line we're talking about in the budget. So this next slide is just like I was talking about the new general ledger numbers. I put in the first bullet an example. In past years, beginning balance in 1002 was 10,002,301.01. Well, in Oracle, it is now 110,101,0002-30101. So it's going to look a little bit different. And just to kind of break it down, and I don't think we've ever provided this detail in the past when you're looking at a general ledger number, because it means more to us in finance and accounting and budgeting than it probably does anywhere else. But this is how we track every revenue and expenditure. Every dollar that comes in and out of the county is tracked with these general ledger numbers. So when you're looking at it, Fund 110, the first 3 digits, that denotes the fund. And typically 110 is going to be a general fund. You'll also see other funds are going to be in the 200s, 400s are capital funds, 600s are internal service funds. So as an example, insurance reserve historically was Fund 80. That is now Fund 680. And so it helps us for data and for tracking and everything that comes in with these new numbers. The next number you're going to see denotes the department, so 10 is admin, 15 is tax and assessment, 25 is the DA, 30 is planning, 45 is the sheriff's office, and et cetera. So that's something that we didn't have in the past. We didn't have department codes, but with the new system and corresponding with Oracle, we now have more detailed. We're able to consolidate a lot of these budgets by department. The 1002 is the program or the division. That's going to resemble what we had before when we used to have the old fund 10002. So now it's 10002. It's still the same division. And then when you get down into the type codes, the 30101, these are budgetary type codes, and this is really how we get into the details. Typically, if it's in the 30,000 range, those are revenues. 40,000 are personnel expenses. 50,000 is materials and services. 60,000 there's contract services, and so on. You can see it from the slide. And so that's really how it communicates. And so it interacts with our system. That's how we're able to pull reports, and a lot of the information you're going to see in my upcoming slides, how we're able to filter that down on total personnel costs, total capital costs, what are our revenues, and those numbers break down even further by individual line item codes. So hopefully this information is helpful. It's something that we haven't really discussed in detail, but just wanted to make sure, because I know a lot of times we throw out general ledger codes, and I know we're probably speaking a different language for most folks. But if you have any questions about that, or if you're having a challenge finding that specific line item, or having challenges with calling out I don't even know how many digit code that is these days, but if you have any challenges, if you, like for this one, if you said 1002, 30101, that at least gets us there, and we're happy to help with that. Like I said before, new system, we're using this for the first time, a lot of improvements. I already talked about how we rolled this project out. And then also there's a bullet in here talking again about the personnel data. And we had to do a workaround to build that into this. Another new item that you're going to see when you're going through the budgets, there's a new narrative section. This is something that's new. We didn't have it in the past. Usually we would get memos outside of the system and departments would email a memo for their budget narrative, and we would put it into the binder. But now we actually have it built into the system. So departments they build their budgets, and then they go into another module in the system, and they're able to enter their narrative, and it puts it together in the complete report. And what I'm hoping is you're going to see a lot more narrative in front of these budgets that will help really clarify what that specific budget does. I think that was a gap that we had in the past, and hopefully for better transparency and a better understanding exactly what those funds are being used for, you're going to see some narrative that's going to be included in there. It makes the budget book a lot bigger, but not so much bigger than what we've been through in years past. It's, hopefully you'll find it useful. But again, with the new system and a lot of these changes, putting together the budget each year is challenging enough, but now implementing a new system at the same time has presented some challenges, but at the same time, I think we're set up for success. I'm really excited about in future years when HCM goes live. It's going to be such a huge time saver for a lot of departments, because instead of doing a lot of your salary projections and doing all this work in separate spreadsheets and then just entering it into a system, a lot of this work's already going to be done in EPM, because it's going to be pulling data directly out of our workforce. And so you're just basically going to be requesting position or making changes, but otherwise we're going to have live data coming through. I think this helps for both transparency and for accuracy as well, to really hammer down and narrow down on what our personnel costs are. Any questions about all that? And if I'm going too fast, just let me know. Trying to get us back on schedule a little bit, but so next is what folks are used to seeing each year. Is the budget overview. This first slide is the current fiscal year. This is the 22-23 adopted budget. The total budget for 22-23 was just over $199 million. You're going to see over the last several years, we've received a lot of CARES Act funds. We've received a lot of ARPA funds. There was a lot of funds that were coming in from federal and state resources specifically related to the pandemic. So you will see some changes. And when you look at internal services, 18%, that's pretty large. There was a lot of transfers that were occurring within internal services related to ARPA funds and some of the revenue replacement and setting funds aside in capital reserve and insurance reserve, and then also transferring to departments. So you're going to see that number come down. Again, criminal justice and HHS make up more than half of the total budget. So criminal justice team is 21%, health and human services is 33%. So how does that compare to what we've prepared and what we're considering this week? So 23-24, the big one I want to call out is you're going to see a drop in internal services because we don't have, we've been spending down ARPA. We don't have the big transfers that we had in prior years. Criminal justice is 21% and health and human services is 36%. Still, criminal justice and HHS make up more than half of the total budget. And then general government's right around 10%, public works 11%. So the total budget, what we're going to be presenting this week is just over $189 million. Any questions on this slide?
Chair Fields, if I might.
Yep.
I had in my notes from last year that HHS saw a 4% growth. So are we looking at a 3% growth this year?
I think we can, maybe when HHS gets in that presentation, because this slide doesn't necessarily represent growth in the size of the fund, because again, it's how we divide up the total fund.
Okay.
And so there's a couple things. You may see some increases and some growth in health and human services, but then the other part is when you see the internal services that we're not doing transfers out of ARPA because we've been spending those funds. So that's going to redivide the total distribution of the fund. So
Gotcha.
you're going to see the budgets smaller, and then HHS are still and consistently are, it's 350, 360 employees. It's our largest department. And that's why we have Lindsay start off with the very first presentation at 10 o'clock, and she'll be able to get into details about that.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so next I'm going to go over revenues. So when looking at what the breakdown, so of that $189 million, what is the revenue that's supporting all of those expenditures? You'll see that the one I want to call out is the taxes. When you look at that, that only represents 15% of the total income. Most of the funds where we rely on building our budgets is going to be beginning balances. So any unspent funds from the previous fiscal year. And then intergovernmental funds is another large portion. Intergovernmental, that's everything from state grant and aid that either comes in and funds HHS services or funds criminal justice, Department of Community Justice, in particular, the adult parole and probation. All their funds are from state funds. And then you'll see fees and charges is another large category. I believe that's where we have most of our Medicaid funds. That's also planning fees. And even though that's a big number, most of that is going to be health and human services with a lot of those fees. Any questions on that? So how do we compare? You're going to see this compares what we have proposed to the prior adopted budget. So you're going to see a little bit of a dip in balances. You're going to see a slight increase when it comes to taxes. You're also going to see a dip when it comes to intergovernmental, because again, we're coming out of the pandemic and there were some funds that were specifically, tied to pandemic response. You're going to see some of that drop, but then you're also going to see that like community corrections in particular, when you hear their presentation, they're seeing some potential legislative cuts that could be happening. And it's any of our departments that are getting state grant and aid are watching the legislature very closely right now. It's one of the struggles that we have because we're going into a new biennium. So there's a lot of unknown when departments are building their budgets until the legislature, acts on the governor's recommended budget and they adopt a budget. We're trying to do our best estimate and best guess on what revenues are going to look like. And most of the numbers are put together were based on the governor's recommended budget with some slight modifications depending on information that departments are receiving. So that's something that we watch closely. That is something that could change between now and budget adoption. Like I said before, we watch the legislature pretty closely to see what's going to happen and see if there's going to be further impacts, cuts, or possible increases or funding being restored, depending on how much reliance there is on that state grant and aid. I really look at Health and Human Services and Department of Community Justice are the two in particular that we really keep a close eye on. And then the next slide, this is a 5-year comparison. So you can see that we've had the last couple of years where we saw an increase in balances. And a lot of that was specifically driven by cost savings experience with vacancy savings. So it's not necessarily something that we're happy about. We like having the cost savings, but we don't like having the vacancy savings because that has had an impact on service delivery. So we have seen some increases based on vacancies over the last several years. Based on information that we're seeing lately, hopefully we're trending in a much better direction and we're seeing some of these positions being filled. Other areas of cost savings that we've realized is things like the CARES Act, where we were getting expense reimbursement for anything that was COVID related. We were able to use some of those funds instead of local funds. And so you're going to see that had a positive impact on some balances. But again, I'm always careful when it comes to balances because most balances are the result of one-time cost savings. We can't really rely on them on ongoing operational costs because at some point you're going to spend your beginning balances down and you're not realizing those cost savings. So it's not necessarily sustainable. Oh, question.
Ken, how did you describe the big drop in the internal charges from last year?
That a main part of that is we did a lot of transfers last year, and a lot of that was ARPA related.
Oh,
So
okay.
we had transfers coming out of Fund 32. And so it's an odd one because it shows as a revenue for the department, depending on if we take it out of Fund 32 and we move it to 1002 to send it out to a department, it's going to show up as a revenue for that department. So pretty substantial drop. All of that is ARPA related.
Okay, thank you.
And again, you'll see the trends on the intergovernmental. You're going to see a drop in that. A good example of ARPA in particular, when we were receiving that $21 million, that was 2 fiscal years. And so we received the funds, it sat in the beginning balance. And so you're going to see a higher than anticipated balance. And then we started transferring and spending those funds down. And so when we start getting into the presentations, that's one where you could see multiple drivers dictating what these trends are going to look like. So one year, you're going to see an increase in intergovernmental. It's because we received a large amount. The next year, because depending on how quickly we spend those funds that have been released, it's going to be in those beginning balances. And then once we do the transfers, then you're going to start seeing some spikes. So you can see how, depending on the timing of when we receive funds and when they're finally transferred or when they're spent, you're going to see that it drives a lot of these trends. So this next one, this is a 5-year, question.
Chair, I have a question.
Yep.
I know Derek will be here and be able to answer this in more detail, but when we make projections about taxes,
Mhm.
we pretty much know, and typically when we start to see economic impacts, it's usually several years down the road.
Mhm.
So you're pretty sure, I mean, they're pretty sure they have an idea of what the tax revenue is going to be. It's just the following year that we would have some concerns.
Mhm. Yeah, we feel, we work with Derek. In fact, this is one of the first things we do to kick off the budget process. We reach out to Derek and get his forecast on what he's projection. We look at collection rates, we look at trends, we look at all of that, and even the numbers that we build in. And I know Derek and I in the past have had some disagreements about the numbers, because what we have budgeted, I tend to not budget the full amount on what he's projecting. Again, when it comes to budgeting, I come from the old school that you be conservative with your revenues and then overestimate on your expenditures, because you definitely don't want to be in a position at the end of the fiscal year where I come out and say, well, we didn't hit that mark, and now we're short and now we have to make cuts. But we feel pretty good about these numbers based on what Derek's been seeing as far as collection rates and trends and everything and I think we budgeted a 4% increase for this year in 1002 when it comes to property taxes.
Thank you.
There's a lot of drivers that go into that number as well, because again, we're property values, appraised value. If there's anything new, economic conditions, all that is something that we keep an eye on pretty closely. But like I've said in years past, especially during the pandemic, when it comes to economic downturns, and there's usually a 1 or 2 delay before we really feel it at the county level, where we start seeing those impacts. So it's something that we definitely keep an eye on.
Okay, thank you.
So the 5-year total revenue trend, you're going to see that over the last several years, kind of unprecedented as far as size of budget. Last year was the largest budget we've ever adopted here at the county. As expected, we're trending down. A lot of that is, right off the top, $21 million in ARPA funds. Once that starts coming off, and then depending on what the legislature does, we're keeping an eye on it. I'm anticipating we're going to start seeing some spending down of reserves. We're going to start seeing projects coming off the books. The Oracle project's another example. We had several projects on the books that we're closing up, and we're seeing revenues that are ceasing. So I think we're going to start trending down a little bit I think we're going to continue to see a trend. That doesn't mean that we're heading, we're not heading towards a plane crash. It just means that over the last several years related to the pandemic, between CARES Act, the American Rescue Plan Act, a lot of those federal funds, a lot of the funding that was coming through the state and going directly to HHS to support their efforts. A lot of that funding, now that we're on the other end of that of COVID-19, we're going to start seeing those revenues coming off the books. And so I think we're going to start trending back down to more where our budget should be. But again, I do want to manage how quickly we get down to that level at the same time. And so what you're going to see in this budget that's being proposed is a very conservative approach, and trying to make sure that we are also not just thinking about the next fiscal year, but we're thinking about the next 3 to 5 fiscal years as well. This is a slide we include every year to just kind of show that share between what is discretionary and what is dedicated. You can see how that's evolved over time. Most of the funds that we do have in the budget related to all the various intergovernmental funds and fees that we have, that's all restricted funds. And 17% is what we would call discretionary or general funds. I call that out because anytime that a department may be having a challenge and you may see another department that has a balance. It doesn't mean that we can necessarily pull funds from Health and Human Services and put it over in admin who may be having, because their funds are restricted. So there is some restrictions around how we're able to move and use those funds. They're either restricted by statute, restricted by intergovernmental agreement. It really depends on the funding source. So again, most of our funds are not discretionary in nature. Most of our funds are restricted funds, and they have to be used for a specific purpose or within a specific department. All right. So now I'm going to go into a little more detail about what we call discretionary funds. It's also known as the general fund revenue. So this is work that, again, we started doing last fall, and we've been refining this as we've been building the budget of building what our general fund looks like. And so you'll see that it's comprised. We had some beginning balance. Some of that was collections came in better than anticipated. We also had a pretty large reserve for the future in this fund, and I'll go into more detail when we talk about that specific budget later today. The current year taxes, you're going to see the 27 million. Again, that's included a 4% projected increase for next fiscal year, and also projecting a 95% collection rate, which is pretty standard what we do each year. The other things that comprise the general fund is the ONC fund, 65,000. We never know exactly if we're going to receive those funds or not. And so you're going to see that when we get into more detail on that specific budget, we do have this as a placeholder, but then that's subject to federal legislation and whether or not we're going to release ONC funds. And then we have all of the other lesser taxes, the amusement tax, the cigarette tax, the liquor, marijuana. Marijuana is one that one's been a challenge to really trend and track over the years, because there's been a lot of, in the first year, we were seeing much larger dollar amounts coming in, but then we've seen some legislative changes to where they pulled some of the funds from the county allocations. And it's one that it's really difficult to trend. I hope it's more than the 88,000, but we won't know until we actually start seeing deposits. So this is one that each year, the first year we budgeted pretty high, but we had also received some back payments because there was a delay in actually Department of Revenue and collecting those tax revenues. And so we had some back payments included in that. And then we saw some legislative changes each year that have been eroding the county's allocation that's coming in.
I have a question,
Mhm.
Chair, if I may. Regarding the opioid settlement dollars, do they go right to HHS? Do they come into general fund?
They're not going to be in here because they're, and that's something that I will be talking to the committee about on Wednesday. I'm not prepared to talk about it, but we do need to set up a special revenue fund for those opioid settlements. Right now, we've been getting notification. It's kind of piecemeal. We keep getting these kind of random notifications. I've been sitting down trying to track, okay, who's part of this? How much are we going to, it's really difficult to forecast. So far, we've only received funds from the Janssen settlement, and I think we received just over 180,000. I think that's a number. I'm looking at Mike, but I don't remember off the top of my head. Those won't be deposited in here because there are restrictions per the settlement agreements on what the funds can be used for. So what we're going to do is set up a special revenue fund to budget all of those revenues that are coming in, and then the board and the budget committee, it probably won't be ready to act on for the budget committee this week, but anticipating that later on we'll build the expenditure authority, so then the board can make some decisions going into the next year on where and how those funds are going to be used.
So
But
that-
most of the funds are going to be limited to treatment more than anything else. So it could be HHS, but there could be other programs as well.
And that's something that the Board of Commissioners will be deciding,
Correct,
not the Budget Committee.
correct.
Okay.
Real quick, what is an example of an amusement tax? What is that?
That's the lottery,
Oh.
video
got it.
lottery.
Okay.
So Chair, so for opioid settlement, are you just gonna kind of guess in terms of what might come in?
I'm not gonna, because that's why I'm trying to, that's one of the reasons we're not ready and able to present. We've been trying to get our arms around it. It seems like every time I feel like I have an understanding of what to anticipate for settlement funds, then county council gets notice of, oh, there was another settlement that came in. And so I'm still trying to get my arms around that because again, we try to project and provide estimates in the budget, but the numbers that we build on are built on real numbers. You know, I like to have actual projections that I feel confident we're going to have because I don't want to build an appropriation authority in the budget and miss the mark. And we went out and spent funds under that. And, you know, I don't want to get sideways with Oregon budget law. So it's something that with the opioid funds that later, you know, hopefully on Wednesday, I'll be able to have a little bit more of a discussion about what that special revenue fund is going to look like. Or it might be something that we add to the budget prior to adoption because it shouldn't, right now, the amounts, they're not huge, but as far as an annual basis, I think Janssen in particular, it's like 80,000. I have so many numbers going through my head. So that's just an estimate. Don't hold me to that, but that's going to be like a 15-year payment.
Yeah.
So, and a lot of times what we're getting released to us is just a total amount. And so that's why we're having to go into detail and pour through all the settlement agreements and try to come up with that annual number is going to look like. But I feel confident we have received some funds. We've put those into as a stopgap because we did not have a special revenue fund. Right now, we've deposited those into Fund 80, which is a restricted insurance reserve account. And so what we'd end up doing is the funds that we have received will transfer those out of Fund 80 into the new special revenue account. And then moving forward, any deposits that are received will go into that special revenue account. And then any expenditures will also come out of that same special revenue account because we still have obligations under those settlement agreements to make reports back on how the funds were used and ensure compliance with the settlement agreements.
Do we get into trouble if we say, oh, you know, we'll give ourselves maybe $400,000 in budget authority, but then we only receive 200?
Well, we would only be able to spend 200,000. I'm always careful when it comes to placeholders. And so I don't know if the number will be that high, but again, they keep coming in piecemeal and some of the amounts are large, some of them are small. So it's really hard to kind of track.
Yeah.
They needed a few accountants more other than attorneys sitting at the table with some of these discussions because the information that we're getting is from all this legal counsel and not necessarily numbers folks.
Right.
So
Is any of that going to be designated for the legal part of this, those attorney's fees, or did they already take those out?
no, they haven't taken those out. We're still trying to get our arms around what that's going to look like because there's a 2% that goes for legal charges. And so that would be another expense category that we would build into that special revenue fund and be able to track it there as well.
Back to the amusement tax question, our video lottery dollars are way more than $20,000. Is that a separate
Well,
line?
there's different ones. There's video lottery that goes into economic development. And so this is what we see that's discretionary that comes directly to
Okay,
the
I see what
county.
you're saying. Okay,
Yeah, so again, these funds that I'm talking about here is the general fund.
okay.
What we use for the general fund that we distribute out to all general fund departments.
So the amusement one is that because lottery, you can pull a certain percentage from lottery to go into general fund, right?
Mhm.
So is this that percentage or is this a whole nother?
This is basically a placeholder. The number usually comes in pretty close to this. We trend this out. We have no way of anticipating. We can't.
But it's part of that lump sum that comes in from lottery.
It's a separate.
It's separate.
And we get it once a year.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it's called amusement tax, or is that what we name it?
That's what it's called.
That's what it's
Okay.
called.
All right.
Yeah, we don't tax people's amusement. So.
I'm amused every day.
We provide amusement.
Yes.
All right, so the next few slides, again, is I'm gonna go over in detail on the discretionary allocation. And if you look in your budget book, you're gonna see this large 11x17, and I'm gonna send that to you, Doreen. I haven't had a chance to email that to you. There's an 11x17 spreadsheet that's in there that shows the breakdown of the discretionary allocation. So for 22-23, you're going to see again that large number, that 14% to internal services. That's not normal. There was several ARPA transfers to capital improvement that went through the allocation, and you'll see that based on the current year budget, 62% of that went to criminal justice, so 21 million. Moving forward, for this budget, you're going to see where, again, internal services got back down because there's no large one-time transfers that went out from 1002 of ARPA funds. You're going to see that criminal justice is pretty close to 70% of the general fund allocation. And if you remember from last year, if you look at the year before, this is pretty typical that this is the sheriff's office, district attorney, juvenile probation, juvenile detention, really make up almost 70% of the discretionary allocation. And of that amount, more than half of that is the sheriff's office. And that's for running all the various programs in patrol and on the jail side. The one thing that I would highlight with this, in anticipating that we didn't have the ARPA funds. Again, that was a one-time distribution that we did last year. And then the second part, the challenge that we have, if you go back to let me go back to the previous slide. When you look at the current year taxes and the prior year taxes, that combined amount, just over $27 million. And, we're distributing, this year's distribution is $30 million. So we're having to utilize a lot of the other taxes and beginning balance. And we're seeing a lot of strain on the balances for the general fund. And so for this year, we asked departments when they started building their budgets per the board adoption of the allocation, it represented a 2% decrease in their general fund allocation. So it's something to keep an eye on as we go through the budgets. I think most folks have been able to use any cost savings they may have had, using their beginning balance, or they were able to apply some minimal cuts in order to balance to that 2% change in their discretionary allocation. On the flip side, you're also going to hear, some pretty, substantial add back requests are going to be coming forward. Two that are in the packet right now is the sheriff's office and district attorney's office both have add back requests coming forward. Because again, they have a lot of personnel costs and they pull 70%. They don't have a very diverse revenue stream. They really rely heavily on the general fund. And so that 2% increase is not a decrease is going to have an impact because their other revenues aren't necessarily able to keep pace with that.
The way I read that was they actually pulled them out to balance their budget. And they're like, hey, we pulled this out, but we want this back in again as the add back.
Yep.
For both of those departments.
So you're going to see that when they present, there's a few add back requests that are going to be coming forward. So, but it's one that I keep an eye on because again, like I said, it's not sustainable to allocate out $30 million when we're only receiving $27 to $28 million a year in taxes. We've been able to utilize balances, but it's not sustainable. And we have a limited availability. If you go back to that other slide and again, only 17% of the total budget is tax revenue. And so that presents all kinds of challenges. That's why we did a 2% this year, to hopefully offset, because I'm trying to avoid going into a budget and doing something more drastic like a 10 or something larger. And so we did a 2% cut. So hopefully departments will start using some of those balances that they may have, implement some cost savings measures where applicable or where they can, and to hopefully offset some of that. So we are able to maintain some reserves in these funds.
Chair, I just want to make sure I'm clear on, so if we look at it like a scale, status quo would have been 0. You asked for 2% decrease.
Correct.
That can be made up by using beginning balances, not filling positions that are vacant, cutting
Correct.
materials and services.
Correct.
However, we also have 4 of the 5 bargaining contracts open that we don't know about.
Yeah.
So that affects the 2%, correct? I mean, that's the impact is going to then
Yeah.
go above and beyond that.
It will.
Okay. Does that make sense, everyone?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Checking. Oh, I'm running way behind on time, so I'm going to try to pick this up a little bit. So this next slide, again, this is a trend on the discretionary allocation. The one part that you can see that most departments have been either pretty flat or pretty steady as far as the discretionary allocation. The criminal justice team, there's been several requests over the last several years, add back requests. We've seen a lot of growth and demand on the general fund. So again, if you look at the trend, the criminal justice team has always taken a majority of the general fund. That's just the nature of the budget and government services. And you see where that's been trending up. You'll see one small spike, again, the internal services, but again, that was some one-time transfers that occurred last year. And so they're not happening this year. So that has dropped back down. Now I'm going to quickly get into expenses and overview. This is the current, this slide represents the current fiscal year, what we have budgeted. You'll see that we budgeted personnel costs represent about 41% of the total budget. The next up is materials and services is right around 33%. So again, this is budgeted numbers, and then you'll see that we had 12% in reserves. And the one thing to clarify when it comes to reserves doesn't necessarily just mean that we have money saved that's available for backfilling, or we could just use it as a discretionary type fund. We do have some discretionary reserves, which I'll get into more detail on, but this could also be reserved for the future lines that it could be comprised of restricted funds and HHS, but it's in a reserve for the future, identified for a future capital project. Same thing, sometimes Public Works will reserve funds for a future capital project. We have internal services, like prior to the Oracle project, we had an insurance reserve set up to save for that project. And, so when you see reserves, it doesn't necessarily mean that these are general operating reserves. There are some limited general operating reserves that are in there that we could use in an emergency or to backfill, but for the most part, most of these have been either earmarked or they're restricted, and it's limited on what we can use those funds for. So for 23-24, it's going to look pretty similar as it has before. You're going to see an increase with personnel costs. We're seeing that not just, we have some open questions because like the commissioner was saying, we do have 4 contracts that are still open for negotiation that haven't been settled yet. So we're anticipating some cost increases that could come across with that. But then we're also seeing it in basic roll-ups, whether it's PERS, medical insurance, across the board. I think everyone is seeing cost increases with insurance and everything else, we're experiencing the same thing. So you're going to see an increase in personnel with the proposed budget, and you're going to see a drop in the materials and services. And I believe a lot of that is because of the increase and the limited revenues, that if they're going to save, the first thing we're going to do is look for cost savings in materials and services before we start looking at cost savings in personnel. Not every department is able to do that. Some departments, when we start getting into the presentations, you're going to see that they're pretty personnel heavy. They don't have a lot of materials and services lines. Most of their department is personnel costs. So this next slide is a comparison between the current fiscal year and what's proposed. And you'll see that the increase when it comes to personnel, but then you're going to see a drop in materials and services, contingencies, a slight increase in capital, and we'll go into more detail later this week about where some of that increases are being found. Reserves are held pretty flat or somewhat down, but again, this doesn't necessarily mean that these are general operating reserves. Another one's just another way to look at it. This is a 10-year expense trend. So you can see personnel costs are going up. But also keep in mind, it's not necessarily that the cost per employee is the driver for this. There's also additional FTEs. We do see an increase in FTEs related to this budget. Last year, I'm looking at my numbers. Last year, we had 680 FTE. This year in the proposed budget, we have 697 FTEs. A lot of those you're going to see it's Health and Human Services for there's expanded programs and a lot of the services, and most of the FTE increases you're going to see is going to be related to HHS.
And those were already budgeted for prior. They're just open positions that are getting filled now, right?
Well, there's even more. We're going to add even more FTEs. And when Lindsay gives her presentation, she'll be able to go into more detail about what that's going to look like FTE wise.
I'm sorry, we're talking full-time employees?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Full-time equivalent.
Yeah, wrap your head around that.
Yeah.
As you go through it, you'll be like, oh, 0.2 here. And then if you go to another budget, the same person has like 0.8 and they add them together. And it's like, oh, there's that whole person. I got it.
Correct. Yep.
Like right now, Ken, I think is a 0.2 right there.
Yeah, but when he goes back to the office,
He's
he's a point,
0.8.
probably a point.
I think he's a-
1.12.
Yeah.
1.5.
The next slide is a 10-year revenue to expense comparison. Again, this is just showing the trends. The dash line is the revenue, the solid line is the expense. The closer those lines get, the more nervous I get. But again, these are budgeted numbers, not actuals. So it's something to keep in mind. We do have actual numbers until you get to 21, 22. And then it's budgeted numbers. And this slide, because I know we have a lot of discussions about reserves and balances and where those come from. This next slide, this shows historic budget to actual when it comes to revenues. You can see in 2021, 21, 22, that our actuals came in higher than budgeted. Again, that's unanticipated funds. A lot of that is ARPA, CARES Act, funds that came through OHA to HHS. There's a whole variety of funds, grants, things like that. We try to do our best to budget for it, ensure that we have expenditure authority. So this is kind of typical. We budget. You won't see actuals for 22 and 23 because, of course, we haven't wrapped up the current fiscal year. So I don't have numbers to share there. And then, of course, 23, 24 is still way ahead of us. We won't have actual numbers until the end of next year. So this just gives a good idea of what we're seeing trends on revenues. For historical budget to actual, again, this is the blue line is what we typically budget. The red line is actuals. I think the 21-22, what you're going to see is and I think we're going to see this for actuals for this current year, that we have all these budgeted FTEs, but we also have a lot of vacancies that are occurring. So you're going to see those gaps, and then that's where we start seeing some cost savings, so one-time cost savings that occur. And then materials and services, this is another one that especially for 21-22, the difference between what was budgeted and what was expended, I think you're going to start seeing that line's going to start coming down. A lot of that was ARPA, getting all those programs rolled out. It's much more than that, but ARPA is one of the big contributors and projects as well. Sometimes we'll budget a project and maybe it doesn't get implemented, or there's other delays, and then we realize cost savings, but it's still important. We want to make sure that we maintain that expenditure authority for that fiscal year. So then if the project can happen, that we can make it happen. But sometimes, priorities change or work changes or other things come up that are a higher priority, and then we realize some cost savings.
So as an example, in the materials and services, would the master plan for the parks be part of that 100,000?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. That was approved, and that's a good example of a project that it was appropriated. The funding's been approved, but Parks wasn't ready to initiate that project. So then that would be carried forward in the beginning balance in the O&C fund, and it's still available and still earmarked and available for Parks to do. That's a great example. There's other projects where it'll be a lot larger, like our capital reserve or our insurance reserve, because we have to budget a large amount to make sure that we can pay any potential claims that come forward as part of our deductibles. And so we budget a pretty large number, and I'm always happy when we carry a big balance in that fund, because that means we didn't have any claims that year that we had to pay out. So you're going to see a lot of that. The big thing is we have to make sure that we have plenty of funds appropriated to actually spend the funds as needed during the next fiscal year. So it's not unusual to see these gaps between actuals and what we have budgeted, because it's making sure that we have sufficient appropriation authority.
Ken, if you look at the historical budget to actual on revenues, you mentioned that we're very conservative about what we budget as revenue, but it seems like when you look at the actual, we haven't been conservative enough, probably.
Mm-hmm.
How does that mesh with the 10-year revenue to expense chart? Because it looks like we've been staying pretty, the gap is pretty steady. ARPA kind of messed that up a little bit, but
Be like the average between the two, right? So revenues were underestimated, but yet the budgeting was well under that. So you got to take those two, right?
right. I'm just, if you look at that one chart, the revenues, it seems like we need to be a little bit more conservative on revenue. But then if you look at this 10-year revenue to expense, the line graph, it seems like we've been, fairly steady and consistent with revenue to expenses. So it's just, I'm not sure how that meshes, but.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I have an answer right now. I can do some follow-up on that. But showing this screen that I have here, you'll see the last couple of years that, the current year, there's also placeholders, and you're going to hear that a lot during this week, that anticipated funds, anticipated grant funds, ideally we'd be matching these numbers.
Yeah.
Perfect world. It would be a direct match. And if you look back in prior years, you're going to see that we were actually, our budgeted was higher than what we actually received. If you look at 12, 13, 13, 14, 14, 15, 15, 16, and so on, until you get to really 19, 20 and 2021 is really the first time that we start experiencing that our collections or the actual revenue that we were realizing was higher than what was budgeted. Typically, it's been the other direction.
Right.
And a lot of that's placeholders, grants, legislative changes, the biennium, like I said before, it's really hard to forecast those revenues. Because the state might not adopt their budget. We might be into July before that.
Or like you said, marijuana funds, you don't know yet.
Correct.
Well, yeah, my point that I'm making is that, we've been pretty close, which is good.
Mhm.
But if you look at, I think it's 12, 13, 13, 14, and then 15, 16, that almost shows, because the recessionary period was between 2010, 2009 through maybe 2012. So it
Yeah.
really does show that there's a lag
Mhm.
in revenue. So it's just something to consider, now that we have warnings of another one.
Yep. So, and then the next chart that I have here, and sorry, Lindsay, I'm cutting into your time. So, Yamhill County audited ending balances. So every year, when we have the auditors come out, Mike does this exercise that he goes through, and basically we have our audited ending balances. These numbers are really important to us because this is what we use to forecast what our ending balances will be this year. So if we budgeted this amount for a beginning balance, but it actually came in better, we need to make sure we factor that in and ensure that we're accounting for that. And it's a lot of budget work that we do, but when you look at it again, end of 2022, but there's also another caveat that's built in there, because I know as part of this number, is this where we put the leave liability numbers that would have been reflected in the ending balances for last year, wasn't it? Remember, we used to have to book the liability, and then we stopped doing that as part of the audited. So there is a portion that we did give back to departments.
True.
But-
The audit is already accounted for that.
Oh, it did. Okay, good. But it's included in there.
Mostly ARPA, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of this is ARPA, HHS, vacancy savings, a lot of things, because again, when we build this budget and we adopt this budget for the year, it's anticipating that we're going to fill all 690 positions, because we need to make sure we maintain those that position authority. So a lot of times when it's unknown, people will leave. We might have delays in hiring. We have, like the last couple of years, challenges with recruiting and filling a number of, difficult positions at the whole industry. I'm thinking behavioral health or some of these other categories. It's really hard to fill positions these days. And so the longer those stay vacant, then we end up carrying that forward in those funds. So this next slide is it's just a little more detail of where those beginning balances or ending balance numbers are coming in. You can see for Fund 110, budgeted 13, came in at the audited number was 18 million. Public Works budgeted 4 million, it actually came in at 6. HHS, pretty close, 14, and the actual was 15. So you can see that this is what's driving these numbers, that we try to project, we were planning on spending, or we were going to fill these positions. They didn't get filled. We didn't implement this project, or we had additional revenue come in that we didn't anticipate. And we end up with a little bit better of the audited to beginning balance. All right, the next one is how do we compare? So as part of the presentation, and each year we start looking at some of our comparable counties. So attached, this first slide is the population growth to comparable counties over the last 21 years. You'll see that we've experienced a 28% change in growth. We've grown since 2000. I think we all know that. Polk County has the highest rate of growth at 45%. So we're sitting about third as far as during that time frame as far as growth goes. It's of course, Polk County's grown quite a bit. A lot of that's probably driven by West Salem more than anything else. So the per capita revenue and expenses, how do we compare? You can see that we're middle of the road. Looking at the two fields, this is a comparison of what our revenue to our expenses compare per capita. Last year, we were fourth lowest in expenditure and fourth lowest in revenue, and we remain at fourth when comparing at the other counties. And then this next slide is comparable counties, difference between revenue and expense. And the one thing that I would highlight is when we're looking at this is taking out balances and some of this is looking at audited numbers. And so when you see like Coos and Douglas County in particular being in the negative, well, it just means that they're probably spending more into reserves because their expenses exceed their actual revenues coming in. We're on the positive, which makes me happy, but you know, we'll see other counties, Benton, Columbia, and Lynn are 18, 15 million, 14 million to the positive. We're just right around 6 million. So. Okay, looking ahead. So I'm really picking it up now. And if you have any questions about any of these particular slides, you can reach out to me as well after this, but see if I can get us back on track here. So looking ahead, some challenges for this week or some conversations that we're going to have or even looking forward into the year. Number one, the demands on the discretionary revenues. This is one that is going to be a theme that we've talked about it already quite a bit during this presentation. You know, the demands are exceeding what's available to be able to share. And so some decisions are going to have to be made on how we continue to support services or if we need to make cuts in areas or how that's going to play out. Again, budget challenges for the criminal justice team, in particular the sheriff's office, is one that I know that I have concerns with. We've had discussions with. They have another add back request that they're bringing forward this week. Long-term county facility needs and courthouse. This is something that we've been working on for a number of years. We completed a strategic plan. We have a laundry list of needs and the courts also have needs, and contrary to popular belief, you know, the courts, it's our responsibility to provide the courthouse for the courts to operate. They need to expand their operations. They need another courtroom. So we've been in a pretty lengthy planning process over the last couple of years, and you're going to see that reflected that we're ready to start implementing some of that, and we're starting to build up reserves so we're able to actually implement that plan in the coming years. And that's going to be a combination of new construction, acquisition, and then also consolidating the county campus so we can actually lessen our footprint here in the downtown area and better utilize the footprint that we do have. So financial system replacement project, I've talked about that at length. Increasing personnel costs. Contract negotiations are underway for 4 CBAs. So we have some unknowns when it comes into what the actual personnel costs are going to look like in the new fiscal year. And I'm not sure when we're going to have those contracts settled, if it's going to happen prior to the new fiscal year or not, but I'm optimistic and I hope so. We're working hard and negotiating with those unions. Reserves and balances, I'm still keeping a look at that. Recruiting and retention. I mean, this is an ongoing challenge. You've heard me talk about it quite a bit, and you're probably going to hear some more from Lindsay when she presents. You know, we do have some positions, some high need positions that are really difficult to fill. We've got some service areas that we're having some challenges, and it's going to be really important. We've implemented several strategies over the last year to hopefully encourage more folks in that industry to stick around. But and also to onboard. We're seeing some trends. It's going the right direction, but it's a much larger issue. It's not a Yamhill County issue. It's a much larger issue that certain industries, medical in particular, are having difficulties right now of filling positions and staying competitive. We further have challenges because trying to be competitive with other counties and within the market, that continues to be a challenge as well. But that's something that we talk about quite a bit during contract negotiations as well. You know, risk and insurance reserves, that's something else that we're always constantly looking at. We're seeing increases as related to the costs with insurance. We're always trying to build up the insurance reserve and just kind of being prepared that at some point we're getting close, but we're not quite there on whether or not we should be making a decision to go self-insured or continue in our current program. So we've been steadily trying to protect and build those reserves. So then if the board decided at a later date to start exploring going self-insured, we'd have the ability to do so. And then another thing where, again, I've said this several times, we're watching potential legislative changes that could be impacting the budget. The fact that the state hasn't adopted their budget for the next biennium leaves a lot of unknown for our departments that rely on those funds. I put this slide in every year. I think this has been an ongoing tradition going back to Laura for a number of years, just because I know the board likes to see this information, PERS rates and what we pay for PERS. And so this has the percentages, and you'll see some totals of what we have budgeted for what the cost is for the personnel cost. And then just highlight, and we'll go into more detail when we talk about Fund 80, that we do have a PERS reserve that was set up a number of years ago. We haven't been moving any more funds into that. The only funds that have been going into that is we did some interfund loans in years past. So there's some repayment coming in. So we do have, you know, about $2.5 million in that PERS reserve if needed. And that's something that we may want to look at, you know, on how we utilize those funds with the escalating personnel costs and some of the challenges that we've seen there. These funds are available to possibly fill some gaps. But keep in mind, it's like any other savings account. Once you spend it, you know, it's spent. You know, we did transfers. There's no revenue that's coming in and driving these numbers. So the good news, retirement reserve is, I just talked about that. We do have that available. Insurance reserves, we are trending the right direction. We've had some, we've done a good job at managing and claims and doing our risk management. I think our risk management program that we stood up is paying some dividends. We are also seeing workers' comp or workers' comp experiences trending the right way as well. And still it was a huge cost saver when we went from our previous provider to SAFE, and we're still realizing some pretty significant cost savings there. Conservative budgeting and fiscal management. We are very careful with how we use the funds that are in this budget. We again, there's not a lot of frill in these budgets. We budget very closely, we're very careful, and we keep a close eye on how public funds are being used throughout the county. We have a great hands-on working managers. We've got the Oracle Cloud ERP. We're looking forward to closing out that project and going fully live with the whole system. We have outstanding employees throughout the county, and I can't say that enough. In every single department, in every office, we have some of the, you know, we have the best employees in the state. They work really hard, and they really do a great job in service delivery and keeping roads open, working with people who may be in crisis, providing law enforcement services, everywhere. Our employees do an outstanding job, and I hope they continue that. And I can't say it enough, what a great job they do. The Capital Improvement Fund, this again, we've been working on building that up. So again, so we can implement the strategic capital planning that it's not just the sake of replacing old deteriorating buildings, but we're really seeing the ability, if we're able to consolidate and realize some cost savings and better flow of information, being able to provide better services. So people aren't having to go on a wayfinding exercise to get a plat signed and they're going to 3 different buildings. Public Works continues to do a great job on a backlog of bridge repairs and then also implementing capital plans. They're just doing an outstanding job out there. HHS continuing to make progress on filling vacancies. And they've been doing a great job with all the expanded services and demands that are coming through, for the last 2 years, or 3 years, they were on the front lines when it came to COVID and the response for that. And their work did not get any easier at the end of the pandemic, because now we're seeing even more reliance and need for behavioral health services, crisis services, you name it. And HHS has done an outstanding job in continuing to deliver those services. And that was it. That's the end of my presentation. That went a little longer. We had a late start, but a lot of great questions. So any questions before? We might want to take a 5-minute recess and then let Lindsay come up and start her presentation.
Yeah.
That'd be great. But any questions?
Thanks, Ken. A lot of
Yep.
work.
Yep.
You want to adjourn us for?
And-
5 minutes?
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to be adjourned for 5 minutes. It's 10:30.
Thanks.
both news registries come in.
But hey,
Mhm.
When we get our 15% of our.
No, it's, oh, it felt interesting.
Foreclosures.
But now I think because
You think
it's
so?
reported,
Well,
this
they-
is like.
Test. Test.
Hello,
1, 2, 3.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Test.
We're already doing it. You hear it, Doreen?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Sorry, Doreen. We're trying to troubleshoot. I'm on my laptop.
Can you hear us, Doreen?
I can hear you guys well. Yes. You can probably hear my squeaky chair.
Can you hear us, Doreen?
I can.
So still no sound in the room.
Mm-hmm.
You do?
Here. I don't know.
With this year,
I was feeling good.
Murders Creek up in the wilderness.
I don't know if I can get it under
That's a little.
not an hour. That's a little tough.
Netflix. I was talking about-
Reclassification, it was a decrease from
I mean,
year to year.
it is-
Mhm.
Oh, I didn't know. Okay.
Yeah,
That was Sandy.
Oh, it was, we changed the bacon. Okay,
Yeah,
I was like,
we just underfilled.
Yeah, yeah.
I can hear you.
Can you hear us, Doreen?
I can.
I think you should look into this. out.
Is it live?
Yeah, it's a little satellite. But it's different. I don't know. I mean, we were in some wooded areas. Yeah, can you say hi for us?
Hello.
Oh.
Is it working?
Yes.
Hey.
Wonderful.
Okay, we're gonna start the budget committee again here. So department budget presentations,
I guess I'm up.
you're up.
Okay, yes, well, thank you all. It's wonderful to see you all here today. Our format will be really similar to format in years past. I'll start with our key administrative and fiscal changes that occurred during this current budget, as well as ones we anticipate in this budget that you are reviewing. We'll talk about our proposed budgets per each division, and then wrap up with some of the things that we're really watching closely over the course of the next fiscal year and anticipate having potential impacts on us. So just to orient you really quickly, there are 3 handouts for you in your packet. One is just our organizational chart, and then there is a memo specific to our reclasses, and then a memo item C specific to our FTE explanations. So I'll reference those as we go through.
Before you get started,
Yes.
could you introduce your team to our
Absolutely,
new
be
budget.
happy to. So I'm Lindsay Manfred, Health and Human Services Director, and I have Lane Pendleton Baker here, who is our Finance Manager, and Jason Hennis over here, who is our Behavioral Health Director. We have a whole team of great managers and supervisors who are busy doing their work today, and I will reference them as we go through and just name them when we talk about the divisions that they're specifically overseeing. Okay. Any questions before we get started? Okay. So a couple of just quick reminders. We are nearly 97% state and federally funded, with our dominant payer being for medically necessary
services or Medicaid, really. We are currently watching the legislative session, as Ken referenced. The fact that we're in the beginning of a biennium has potential huge implications, either pluses or minuses for us with our budget. So we're watching really closely, paying attention when the final revenue forecast comes out this month. And then we'll watch closely and work closely with county administration and our Board of Commissioners should any adjustments need to be made in our budget based on what we're finding through the legislative process. Our 22-23 adopt budget had projected a beginning fund balance of approximately $14 million. This had reserve funds as well as intention of spending $4 million of carryover, and we predicted an ending balance of $8.7 million. Excuse me. Several things occurred during the last legislative session that allowed us to increase revenue in our budgets for some pretty specific and refined purposes. And for a number of reasons, we've not been able to spend all those funds down. And so you'll see that reflected here in a moment when I talk about our beginning balance for this current year. So with this current year, we have a beginning fund balance of just over $15 million.
And if I
Yeah.
could, just so everyone knows where we're at, starting on page 8 in your binders, or page 11 if you're following along in a PDF, but it's page 8 where that Lindsay's starting with.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay. So starting there, thank you, Ken. Just again, we have a beginning fund balance of just over 15 million and are projecting that we actually will not be spending carryover and that our ending balance will be 16.2 million. So different because of some of those increased revenues that we received that for a variety of reasons we haven't been able to spend down, as well as vacancy saving, which I know County Administrator touched on as well. I'll talk about those specific funding streams that are rolling over into this next budget as we go through in the presentation. So you'll learn more about what those are as we get there. This 16.2 million is restricted revenue specific for HHS efforts. And as far as staffing, I will say as noted this morning, we are definitely beginning to see some stabilization. We had our highest peak of resignations happen September of last year. And since then, we've seen those drastically decrease, which we're very grateful for. We're also at the same time beginning to see many more people filling some of our vacancies. And so while we're still not at the same level as pre-COVID, we're definitely trending in the right direction and definitely feeling that stabilization. Okay, so overall, our 23-24 budget has pretty minimal changes from last year. We've got a pragmatic use of about 6.7 million of fund balance, which mostly includes the spending of carryover funds received in the 2022-23 budget. And again, I'll go into more detail as we go along about what those look like. Overall, we've seen a rise in personnel costs. Most notable would be our increase in PERS rates at about 4%, as well as medical insurance at about 3%. And then we have budgeted a placeholder of about 5% for personnel costs. We know there is a lot of things in flux right now, and so that may be adjusted based on how things move forward with the various things that have already been discussed related to personnel costs. Our variable revenue in 22-23, we predicted to return to previous levels prior to the pandemic. Now that we're beginning to see that shift of more clients and folks coming back into services, which is great for a number of reasons. You can see here on the private insurance, which is line 34611, and I'm just using that tail end of the numbers in your budget that you can see. We projected 290,000 for our current year's budget, but now we're expecting that will actually be around 350,000. And so for this budget, we increased our projected revenue from that private insurance to 339,000 to account for those differences. Our public insurance, which is line 34612, that includes.
Excuse me, can you reorient us? I'm
Are we not on
getting a little
Page
lost.
12.
It is 12? Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I don't think you're looking at these lines. Sorry, these are just overviews of some things. We'll go
Okay.
more specific where you'll begin on page 12. I'll let you know when we start on page 12.
Okay,
And that's where you'll see all the really specific ones.
okay.
Sorry about that. So our public insurance, we are anticipating seeing some pretty minimal changes in OHP, although there are some pretty big potential impacts, and we'll talk about that through redetermination. Commissioner Starrett, I know you're well versed in that, being on the CCO board, so I'll talk about that in a couple of different places on our here. But for our purposes with our budget, we are just forecasting OHP remaining flat, essentially. We have in your packet, you can see we've got our information around both reclasses and requests for new positions. Our current budget includes 361.36 FTE, and we are requesting an overall increase to 364.53 FTE. So a small increase request there. Those requests again can be seen in item C of your packet. And I'll highlight what those increases are when we get to the divisions that they are specifically there. So I wanted to touch on our reclasses. So that should be item B in your packet. And
Yeah, so item B,
On page 3.
is everybody able to find that? It's
Yeah,
gonna be right
page
behind the
3.
organizational chart.
Got it?
it's number 3, page 3 on mine. Is that
Yes.
same as yours as well?
Mhm.
Okay. We're all getting used to the new format. Okay, so you can see the memo, so I'll just highlight the reclassifications. We are requesting to reclassify 3 FTE of HS Specialist 2s to HS Specialist 3s. These are staff who qualified for an advanced practitioner role during this current fiscal year and have been receiving lead pay. And we want to use the budget process to shore that up. These are individuals that throughout the year either became licensed as qualified mental health professionals or became duly credentialed so they're able to provide both mental health and alcohol and drug counseling services. And so in our system, when that happens, they qualify for this advanced practitioner role. And so this is 3 of those individuals moving from a specialist 2 to a specialist 3. We are reclassifying 1.425 FTE of Peer 1 to Peer 2. Those show up as HS Techs and HS Associates as far as classifications. Reclassifying 1 FTE of Care Navigator to a Senior Office Specialist. And then reclassifying 12.925 FTE of Office Specialist 2s to Senior Office Specialists due to the increased demands and type of work happening specific to our behavioral health operations. Then you'll see a reclassification of 1 FTE of Program Manager 3 to a 4 that is directly linked and tied to the reclassification of an 1 FTE Administrative Services Director to a Program Manager 4. So what happened there was we had an Administrative Services Director who oversaw both operations and finances for the county HHS service array. She left her position last fall, and when that occurred, we decided rather than having a director position, we were going to instead have 2 program manager positions. And so one of them is Lane here with me, and the other one is Tracy, who oversees some of the operations, and I'll talk more about that when we dive into that. But this is one of those changes that you'll see in every single division because it's spread throughout. Again, you have a memo on the request for new positions, and I will talk specifically about where those fit in with each division when we get there. Our overall operating budget is 56.9 million, with a proposed 68.7 total expense authority to cover the rollover funds, as well as allow for some in and out money in case we have any opportunities to bring in any additional state or federal funds. So, of course, oh yes, I see it.
No, are you at any point going to bring us up to speed on how the behavioral health dollars, those bonuses, that money was used and how that impacts your budget?
Yes,
Okay,
absolutely.
great.
We will definitely talk about that as we get into some of the behavioral health components for sure.
Okay.
I mentioned this earlier. I know County Administrator Huffer mentioned this. This is, the beginning of a biennium. It's always feels a little tricky to try to guess what might be happening there. But should anything change significantly that we see come through the legislature, of course, we will be working closely with County Admin and with the Board of Commissioners to determine how best to move forward should any of that happen. Okay, so now we're going to dive into what should be page 12. Oh, I'm sorry, actually, page 9. On your packet there with beginning balances. And I can touch on the House Bill 4004 here as well. Okay, so page 9, our actual beginning fund balance for the beginning of 2022-2023 was 15,218,553. Again, more than we had anticipated. We're anticipating a beginning fund balance of 16.2 million for the 23-24 budget. This larger fund balance is due to a large number of restricted funds that we received in this last fiscal year that we have not been able to spend down, and I'll speak to those, as well as some of the vacancy savings that we've touched on already. So in that bucket of money that we are still working to spend down and anticipate spending, but will likely carry over into the next fiscal year, includes $2.8 million for behavioral health housing. We are struggling to find properties to purchase with those funds. We have a great plan in place for expanding our transitional treatment and recovery homes, a great program model that has really wonderful outcomes. And if we can find an existing house that we can purchase, then we will be good to go. But that is our barrier at this moment in time. We have been told that we'll be able to carry those funds over in hopes of being able to spend them and find a home for that program in this current fiscal year. So that's part of the funding. In addition to that, we are anticipating releasing a request for proposals to help with other behavioral health housing supports. And as soon as we get that through all of the different administrative components, we'll release that. And there is potential that that would be spent this fiscal year, but if not, it would carry over to next fiscal year. And we are working on the assumption at this point that it will be carried over.
Are you able to use those funds in any existing or projects that are under development? So for instance, the Mission or Provoking Hope or Henderson House, something like that.
Yes, we are. The largest restriction is really that they are going to support individuals with behavioral health needs. That could be mental health or substance use disorder. And so within that context, there's a lot of parameters, and it can include both capital costs as well as operational costs.
So as far as implementing that and working on getting those funds to organizations that are in the process of getting projects completed, is that something that you're actively doing, or do you need them to come to you?
We are working on releasing a request for proposals.
Okay.
And as soon as we get the green light that everything looks okay from an administrative perspective, we will push that out and make it as broadly available as possible so that people can write in, and then we'll have a review team that will determine where those funds go.
And what's the timeline on that?
Well, I was really hoping we'd be able to do this by the end of this fiscal year, but I'm thinking that it'll hopefully happen this summer. As soon as we can get that RFP released. After that, I would say it would take probably about 2 months to go through the process of leaving it open for around 30 days, and then another month to ensure that we have a really tight review process, and then we would be able to determine who's getting the funds.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Is there any funds within that 16.2 that you anticipate you might lose because you can't spend them? Whether it's hiring somebody that you can't hire or,
None of the funds that are in the 16.2 are funds that we anticipate not being able to roll over, at least into the next biennium. Certainly, if they're still unspent, then there is a significant chance they could be removed at that point. In addition to the 2.8 million we just talked about for behavioral health housing, we also have some reserve funds through ARPA dollars. We have $1.3 million for our behavioral health resource network that I will refer to really as the BURN. These are sometimes called Measure 110 funds, although Measure 110 didn't actually fund things. That was marijuana tax revenue that is funding the BURNs, but it's frequently associated with the Measure 110 because it was part of the work that changed and happened as a result of that measure passing. And so we have a fairly significant amount of money that we have not spent on this so far that came to us, largely because that's operational costs for the TTRS program that I mentioned we're waiting to purchase a house for. So as you can see, there's a lot of domino impacts with our budget. And so we are able to roll those funds over, and we intend to do that. And then we're projecting that by the end of this fiscal year, we will have 1.1 million left of the House Bill 4004 dollars. And these are the workforce development dollars specific to behavioral health. So that figure, the 1.1 million, takes into account both the first and second bonuses that we paid the first ones out. We anticipate paying the second ones in June, as well as what we are anticipating we will be using for recruitment bonuses that are happening. We are working on, we just rolled out a tuition reimbursement program. And so there's a lot of those pieces that are still a bit in flux, but those funds are ones that we'll carry into the next budget and continue to utilize. Okay.
Excuse me, how much have you spent of that how much have you spent of that original 404?
The original was 2.4 million. Oh,
The original was 3.5.
oh, that's right. The original was 3.5. We've spent 2.4. We have 1.1.
Okay,
Yeah.
and you can carry that over.
Yes. As long as we keep it very reserved and very specific. The state was very clear. They don't want any of these funds to be spent on anything outside of those pretty strict parameters around workforce incentives. Yeah. Okay. So on page 10 now, there you will see our pool investment earnings increased by 49,000 and our bond investment earnings increased by 105,000. And those are just per our budget instructions. Okay. Any other questions before I jump into our division specific presentation? Okay. All right, well, we are going to start with our administrative services program here. You'll see the description on page 11 and then the budget starting on page 12. This program is led by two folks. I mentioned Tracy Dawson, who oversees our operations, which is largely our electronic health record, compliance, and our quality programs, which are pretty intensive. Medicaid rules have a lot of compliance related to them. And so she does a wonderful job doing that. And then the other half of that division is our finance, accounting, and analytics. And that is led by Lane here with me. This is, I mentioned before, where you'll first see that shift from having a director into two program managers. And so this will be the first place it shows up, but you'll also see it throughout the rest of the presentation. So within revenue here, within the state grant line that you'll see that starts on 33411. The majority is expense authority for potential new state programs, but it also contains 142,000 in our state grant line for fee-for-service payments to hospitals for the indigent population, and that's where we use that funding stream. You'll see public insurance, line 34612, revenue increase by 325,000. This corresponds to the increases seen really with our new CCO contract that was effective January 2023. They run on a calendar year versus us, so we have to implement those things mid-year. Line 36204 is rent. We used to include revenue from WIC, Genoa, Newburgh Eye Clinic, and the Beerley Building, which are all of our places that we hold a lease with. But these revenues have been reallocated to the divisions related to them. So it hasn't changed. It's just looks a little different than perhaps what you're used to. And then reimbursement, which is line 36212, not previously used, and it just reflects cell phone rebates. Kind of random. So the personnel changes in this division, I already mentioned our change from the director to the managers. And other than that, there really aren't significant changes. We are no longer budgeting on the extra helpline, which is the line 48200. And that's across the organization, and rather we're budgeting on accounts related to the positions being filled. This change is directly related to the implementation of Oracle. So just again, not really a change, it's just the formatting, the way that it looks and accounted for there. Let's see, we've got across the HHS and first seen in the HHS admin budget, we've reviewed and adjusted all benefit lines. So these are lines 490 to 499.99 with new rates based on utilization. And then we have a new line, which is 49311. This is a new account based on the paid leave Oregon.
And that's our, because I think I have a note on one of these when I finally caught it. That's our 40% share of the 1%.
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
So under materials and services, we have some small equipment purchases on line 54301, which includes some purchases related to some anticipated employee relocations, meaning moving them around in different buildings. We have contract services line, which is 61102. Again, it's across HHS, but first appears in our admin budget for the storage of our digitized health records. This also contains our contract for Relias, which is where we maintain all of our training and policies for our staff. We have increased schools and conferences at 61202. Also across HHS, but first appears here in the admin budget. You know, we saw a decrease in costs in 22-23, but we are really hoping that as we're seeing more conferences and trainings get back up and be in person, that our staff will be taking advantage of those and utilizing that training budget.
Question. I remember there was at one point, I think it was it last budget cycle or at some point during the year, you had talked about doubling the number of trainings. Were they online trainings, and where are they reflected here?
Was it the amount, the budgeted amount, or the
No,
actual number of
the
trainings?
actual number. In other words, you had doubled the amount of trainings.
It's likely related to implementation of Relias, which holds a number of trainings that are accessible to all of our staff for free. I mean, there's literally hundreds of them on various subjects. And so it was likely related to that impact when we put that in place. It would be my best guess.
But they're not called out specifically in terms of we're devoting this amount of money to trainings, or because I see travel, which is really minimal.
Yeah, we do have, so I think if we look at line, we do have a specific amount of money budgeted for staff training. Our staff are, per our policy, allowed to spend up to 40 hours and at currently $500 a year to go toward the training budget. The majority of our staff have pretty significant CME or CEU requirements to maintain their licensure. And so this is one way that we can help incentivize some retention by supporting that. And in fact, we are proposing to increase that dollar amount from 500 to 750, as we're finding it harder and harder to find a training for $500, unfortunately, particularly some of the more intensive ones that might be in person and off location. But we do have a specific line item in our budget, and I believe it is just this, it's 61202.
schools and conferences.
Yeah.
Because trainings are, some of them are pretty expensive.
They are. And one of the other things that we utilize this fund for, in addition to any trainings that staff may be electing to do with their own training budget, is certainly when we can and when it's relevant, bringing trainings to the staff where we have everyone trained. Of course, that does get expensive too. Sometimes there's travel costs for the individuals providing the training. And because of the type of operations we have, we can't take everyone offline at once. So it usually means that we need to have multiple trainings to ensure that we have adequate coverage, largely for crisis and other services.
I think.
Yeah.
Under,
Well,
go ahead.
go ahead.
No, your chair, you go first.
So I just want to be clear. So you're just saying that $5,000 is all that's been budgeted, or am I reading that incorrectly? Is that ours?
Well,
What is
just
that?
keep in mind, this is just one
One division.
division within HHS. And so
Okay.
you're going to see,
This multiple times.
yeah, this is just admin. and
Okay.
You're going
And
to
this-
see
I
all the other
understand.
various
Yeah.
divisions.
Okay.
Yes, these are a lot of these things that are just broken up, and admin being one of our smaller divisions too, the number is going to be smaller than, say, our behavioral health, which makes up a
Surely.
larger percentage of our personnel. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
So line item right above that, 61130 grant expenses. Can you give an example of that?
That would be, I think those are just
that
funds coming into us.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's grant funding coming into this.
Those are funds
Admin.
we earmark expense authority so that we don't need to go back to the budget committee and ask for increased expense authority to take more funds in.
Got
So
it.
if
Okay.
we apply for a $500,000 grant,
It's
we
a
get that
placeholder.
grant.
Okay, got it.
That's right. Placeholder.
Yeah, that's the simple, it's a placeholder, and you'll see that in various
I
departments.
saw, yeah, I have notes after about the third one. I'm like, well, I'm gonna stop making a note there because I think if I get it answered once, it'll answer for all of them.
Because we're always actively pursuing grants in every single department,
Yep.
and it'd be really difficult if we had to come back to the board every time we got a grant to increase expenditure authority to take in that grant. So a lot of times, there's a certain number of grants that we know we're going to get. And so we'll build that in here to have a placeholder that should they get a $40,000 grant for some program, we don't have to take any further action to increase the expenditure authority within the budget. We already
Right.
have that in there.
Got it.
Okay, thank you. All right, moving to line 65201, building rent, and heat, lights and water, which are on 67002. Also one that's split across the department, but shows up here first. Now utilizes an allocation method that mimics just our transactions out for building reserve, which is in 78001. Part of what you see here is acquiring the new public health building, which we are leasing currently and about to do a renovation to. And I'll talk more about that when we get to the public health budget as well, but happy to answer questions here.
Line item 68302. What maintenance is that for? That's a huge increase. I'm just curious, is it a one-time?
I think this has to do with, is it the allocation, the reallocation? Or is it equipment for? Oh, yeah, thank you. So this is, I want to make sure I'm on the right one here. Yep, 68302.
Yep.
So that's our electronic health records maintenance and consultant expenses, Tableau, and our costs into IT for their system. One of the things that we are currently doing is we have a consultant that we've brought in who will be helping us select a new electronic health record. I'll talk a little bit more about that. I'm not sure if it's a threat or an opportunity, but our electronic health record is we just can no longer maintain it. The organization or the platform has decided they will not be doing any additional updates to it for any provider that is not a physical therapist. We provide a lot of services within Health and Human Services. Physical therapy is not one of them. So we got a very abrupt notification from them and have been working really closely with Shane in IT to formulate a plan. we are able to maintain our current system without making any updates, which is challenging. And so we're trying to move this process as quickly as possible. But the increased expenditures is largely related to a consultant who's helping us identify and select a new system.
Grammar, okay.
Yeah. Okay, and then we held a new public insurance line, which is 72021 flat, due to the flat membership projection of OHP that I mentioned earlier, and continue to budget 1.25 million in new state grants, 72011, which is that money we just talked about, the placeholder money. We have a decrease in our forecasting for capital department equipment, 80080. This line maintains expense authority for a new server and software needs related to, again, our electronic health record. All right. So moving on to transfers, this is where you will see the county general fund, the 2.205141 money that we get on line 38091, as noted per our budget instructions.
Page 16.
Then moving to page 17, you can see our ending fund balance. We are anticipating an ending fund balance of 9,508,396. Like I said, most of which is restricted funds, and much of which is, I mentioned some of the contributing factors of why we have that increase. Although I will say, with a budget our size, that is definitely less than a 90-day operating cost. So still fairly small if you start thinking about things that could potentially go wrong. Okay, that's our administrative budget. If there aren't any questions, I can jump into our public health division budget. Okay, this team is led by Bill McKeelson. He's our public health manager. I still maintain the role and function of public health administrator, which is one of the statutory roles a local public health authority has to have. Public health, I joke that before 2020 was the division no one knew anything about. Now everyone knows all sorts of things about us, but there's a lot that happens there besides communicable disease work. This division provides a vast array of services, including environmental health, communicable disease, vital records, maternal child health, preparedness, and then a large number of health promotion and prevention programs, everything from alcohol and drug and tobacco prevention to suicide prevention, and a lot of things outside of that as well. So this budget begins on page 19. Thank you. Okay, so revenue, we let's see, on line 32101, we are predicting our restaurant licenses are going to increase by $40,000. We're beginning to just see those licenses increase, which is a great thing for our community. We're holding flat projection for vital records. These are death and birth certificates that are issued at the health department. Federal grant lines, which are lines 33115, 33172, and 33173, remain stable and include a number of our programs, including preparedness, maternal child health, and some of our prevention and communicable disease and drinking water, clean drinking water. We've got new account code on 33173. This account breaks apart 33172 to distinguish between vendor and subrecipient. This only applies to a handful of our program elements or state contracts within public health. On line 34610 is our patient fees, and we adjusted those up by 5,000.
While we're, before we get too far
Yeah.
beyond the 33172, are you concerned with the $200,000 decrease? Or is that normal? Went from 1 million to 741 plus the 40, so about 780. And it was 1 million last year.
Yeah, it's largely not a decrease, and it's just the way that it's reflected by being broken out differently in this budget year. Feel free to share more.
So 33172 was where we originally kept all of our federal revenues. I learned from my time over in central finance that it makes it really difficult for us to do our CFA, which is one of the reports at the end of the year that looks at federal grant funds. One of that being we only need to report one of those between subrecipient and vendor. So we were spending a lot of time each year trying to pull apart all those revenues. So by splitting them apart in the account, it's going to make the CFA much easier.
But did it only split to one, or is there other line items that it split out of then?
It's split between those two and it is less. It reflects revenue seen closer to 21, 22.
Okay, I'm just, my general question is if you're concerned with, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Got a lot of concerns. That one's not necessarily one of them,
Okay.
but yes. All right, so back to where we're at with our revenue in public health. I mentioned we adjusted our patient fees up by 5,000. Private insurance, which is line 34611, increased in 21-22 budget because of the number of vaccine services that we were offering related to COVID vaccine. This is trending down as we would expect, but it's really not trending down as quickly as we had anticipated. And so what you see in front of you shows a slight increase, but overall we continue to see those decrease. And we expect them to continue to decrease as well. As mentioned in the administrative services budget, rent, which is line 36204 revenue, was reallocated to the divisions. In public health, the revenue from Yakima Valley Farm Workers, which operates WIC, is reflected here. We have no changes to this division's personnel. You will see some of those things we talked about originally in the administrative budget that carry through. So the change in the director to program managers, the changes in extra hours and overtime decreasing. And again, no longer budgeting on extra helpline, which is 48200. And then we've adjusted the formula in the budget to better forecast our beeper pay. That's line 48400, as well as certification education 48500. And this is throughout the entire budget, but for public health, this resulted in a slight increase. Materials and services. These have increased and decreased supply lines accounts, they beginning with 5. Based on the current year-over-year trends. We have increased the small equipment purchases in this division, which is on line 54301, anticipating some of those needs with the new building and renovation and moving over there. So that's where that's reflected. The grant expenses, 61130 line is used to delineate expenses related to specific funding source. So in public health for 23-24, we have created some additional program codes to further separate programs, meaning we'll have to use this line less. This reduction on the line is not an indication of a decrease in expenses. It's just showing up in different places. And particularly within public health, we have a lot of really specific programming that has to be coded to ensure that we are reporting back to the states and to the feds appropriately of how we're using those funds. And by separating those out, it really helps us do that more effectively. You can see an increased travel expense on line 63001. We are just seeing staff travel more, which is a good indication since a lot of our staff are community based and we want them out in the community. So that's a great
Can we
thing.
back up one
Yep.
page? Sorry.
Yep.
54301. I have a note there. I need to find it. Small equipment purchases.
Mhm.
What was it? Just out of curiosity.
Oh, largely we're budgeting for the renovation and move of the public health staff.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Because it was $1,000 last year or this year, and it's going to be $8,000. So, okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, just in anticipation
Yeah.
of what those needs are going to look like.
And for the benefit of the budget committee members that might not know what we're talking about, but public health is going to be relocating from its current location into a leased location. And so these funds are to help for any purchases or any improvements that need to happen in the new location with a different
Mhm.
layout or footprint of that building. So.
Got it. Okay.
So these are moving costs then?
Moving costs, potential things like desks or things like that, if we have to reconfigure and not, or if we're not able to use all of the same equipment and things of that nature.
Is this the Kirby building?
We're calling it Kirby 2 because we have Kirby 1, which is houses our veterans and developmental disabilities programs. So Kirby 2. Yeah. Okay, just go back to where we left on line 63001. I mentioned our just increased costs with traveling, but that's anticipated and that's welcome. That means that our staff are out in the community where they need to be. And then building rent 65201 and heat, lights and water 67002. As previously mentioned, have a new formula being utilized. And for public health specifically, this resulted in a little increase.
So I got a question while we're there.
Mhm.
Let me find the line item here. So the building rent is due to because of moving to Kirby, correct? Such a high increase.
In addition to a formula change to mimic really what we're doing when we pay for the rent and maintenance
Okay.
into central admin. So across the board, we're gonna see, so if we were to sum all of this up for HHS, we would see an increase overall due to the new Kirby building. But we're gonna see increases and decreases across the board just from an allocation perspective.
Okay.
Thank you, Lane. So we are anticipating significant decreases in use of the other expense line, which is 69901. This line's historically been used for COVID-related purchases, and we are grateful to not be having to use that. The formula used to calculate bank service charge, which is 69908, projects a much lower expense for 23-24. And this will be just reviewed ongoing as we get closer to the adopt budget. We've mentioned the move for public health a number of times. We also have budgeted in here 500,000 for miscellaneous building remodel line, which is 82001 for the expenses of the actual remodel.
Yeah, the actual remodel is going to be a capital expense, so that's why it's being recorded to an 800 line. Because it's a capital expenditure. Any project more than $5,000 or a purchase that has a lifespan more than $5,000 or 3 years. 1 year has to be budgeted as a capital expense. So that's why you're going to see in two different lines. There might be furniture that we need to buy to facilitate the move. That isn't necessarily going to be a capital expenditure. So that would be up in materials and services. But then the actual remodel of the offices, any improvements, to
Construction,
walls,
yeah.
doors, paint, et cetera, to get the building ready would be a capital expenditure. So that's why you're going to see the costs broke up that way.
We're certainly going to do our very best to minimize any renovation costs. And we know that because part of the public health space is a clinic, that in and of itself can, has some requirements around refrigeration and different things that we need to make sure that we are paying close attention to. Okay, any questions on public health? We can go to our next division. The division description for community sports services starts on 24 and then the budget is on 25. This is led by Emily Frey. And overall, this is our program that houses our high acuity, high fidelity model programs, things like assertive community treatment or ACT, ESA, and programs called individual placement and support, previously called supported employment and supported education. This division is stable and we have very minimal changes for the budget that we're presenting to you. The revenue shows an increase in state grant, the state grant funds, which is line 33411. This is due to burn funds. So the burn funds are split among a number of different behavioral health programs or divisions, and this is where you'll first see them showing up. Overall patient fees on 34610 and private insurance 34611 are beginning to stabilize after being significantly decreased over the last couple of years. We have some minor adjustments that we've made to these lines based on our forecast models. Public insurance, line 34612 growth is due to the increased investments from our CCO contract that was last negotiated and implemented in January. Personnel changes, details can be seen again in items B and C of your handouts. Within this division, we are requesting a reclass of 1 FTE of specialist 2 to a specialist 3. Again, this is someone who qualified for an advanced practitioner role. We're adding 0.3 FTE of an HHS tech to bring the staff up from part-time to full-time. Adding a 0.4 FTE of HS Spec 1, also to bring staff up from part-time to full-time. To support the increased responsibilities associated with our behavioral health programs. These are things that you'll see show up here, but are really within all of our behavioral health programs. It just comes here first, which is the reclass of a care navigator from a care navigator to an SOS. Reclassifying 12.925 FTE of our office specialist 2s to an SOS. And then adding 2 FTE of SOS time, senior office specialist time. And again, these are changes that are within all of the behavioral health divisions. It just shows up here first. And then like all the other division budgets, you'll see the change in the from the administrative director to 2 program managers, as well as the increases in beeper pay, which is line 48400, and certification and education 48500, because of the formula adjustments. Same as what we talked about in the other budgets, just you're watching them carry through to the rest of the divisions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because that was mine was beeper pay again, but which is actually falls through to a lot of different departments. And I was just like, what is beeper pay?
Yeah.
What consists of beeper pay?
So beeper pay,
It's like after
we
hours?
hold, yes, we hold on to old language, even though we don't issue beepers anymore.
Okay.
But it's
Fun.
for anyone, and you're going to see it throughout the county, anybody, and it's in our contracts. It's something we bargain over language, but anytime we have employees that are after hours on call, so facilities is a good example for that. So
Okay.
If there's a water leak in the courthouse that's discovered after hours, you call the after hours. We have folks that are on standby and they get compensated for the sake of carrying a paging device.
Right.
It's usually a
Being
cell
on call.
phone. Yeah.
So the increase for that line item going dang near to 40 grand from 15, that is just, it's all there somewhere. It just got reallocated in different areas because of the move around with FTEs.
Correct. We have
For
not actually
groups.
increased the amount of
Okay.
beeper pay. Okay, so moving to materials and services. Let's see. Again, we've got in 2022 and 2023 budget, small equipment purchases included an estimate for replacing some outdated and broken furniture at the Abacus House. And that additional expense authority was removed for this current budget. So that's why you see the decrease there. The locum tenens contract decreased by 200,000, resulting in overall decreases for professional contract employees. That's line 61025. You'll see this in one of our other divisions, but it shows up here as well, or at least first. Same things as other divisions that you will find carrying through here. We are requesting to do an increase in training budget from 500 to 750 per employee. That's the schools and conferences line 61202. Building rent 65201 and heat, lights, and water 67002. That was again the formula that was updated. And then a decrease in other expenditures or expenses found on line 69901 due to less COVID expenses. And then the bank service charge 69908 using the new formula we mentioned earlier, and we will of course review that and adopt. For capital, 70,000 was budgeted on a vehicle replacement in our last fiscal year. That expense authority was removed for this budget, and you will see that removal on line 80202. They purchased the vehicle this fiscal year, so that expense won't continue. Any questions on our community support services? Our next division is our family and youth division. It is largely led by Zoe Pearson in our McMinnville clinic. And we do have some youth services that are operational in our Newburgh clinic, who is led by Tiffany Wright. So the two of them together do a wonderful job with working through all of the various things you can imagine working with kids and their families. This budget narrative starts on page 30, and then the budget itself begins on 31. Overall, this program remains really stable, very minimal changes. We are anticipating and having conversations with some of our school partners who are looking to increase the FTE contracted staff they have. And so while we don't have any of those numbers finalized, we hope that we'll have them finalized by adopt. And if not, we will certainly be coming back to the Board of Commissioners if there's potential to add those contracts. And again, those are contracts that we have with our school districts to provide supports and services to kids and their families at the school to minimize disruption and barriers such as travel and whatnot. Under revenue, our federal grant funds, line 33172, and state grant funds, 33411, are holding relatively flat. Patient fees 34610 and private insurance 34611 lines were adjusted slightly just according to our variable revenue projections. And then public insurance, which is the 34612 growth, is due to just the increased investments from our CCO contract. We do have some personnel requests in this budget, largely for one FTE of Program Manager 1 that shows up on line 40137. This is actually a supervisor in our system, and really hoping to overall just decrease the staff to management ratio there to ensure that we're providing adequate support and the required licensure supervision that we need to do within our behavioral health system. And you can see details also on those handouts. Any other changes are just the changes that we've made to the whole HHS budget that are carried through here, including the administrative services director to program manager change, the reclasses around the care navigator to senior office specialist, the reclasses of our OS2 positions to senior office specialists, as well as an addition of the 2 FTE senior office specialists.
Excuse me, Lindsay. I was wondering, can you quickly explain 34613 local contracts, just to clarify exactly what that refers to? It's still in the revenue section.
Which was 34612?
13, it's the local contracts.
Oh, yeah. Those are our school contracts. And so the way that those programs work is the school pays 50% and we pay 50% of the FTE. And what that allows us to do is provide services to youth that may not be Medicaid eligible, or to provide services to youth that may not qualify as medically necessary from a Medicaid standpoint, but are still supporting them in their classroom or things like that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay. So all of the other changes, again, are just carried through, projecting reductions in extra hours, 48000, as well as reductions in overtime, which is 48100. And then same things mentioned in the previous divisions, no longer budgeting on extra help line, which is line 48200. Our beeper pay 48400 and certification education 48500 formula changes that I've mentioned. And then you'll see the paid leave Oregon line 49311 as the new account there. Oh, materials and services. We've got chain or schools and conferences. Again, same thing we saw in the other ones. This is on line 61202, is increased for two reasons. One, we are wanting to increase that training budget from the 500 to the 750, like I mentioned. And we've identified some division specific trainings that we are really wanting to ensure we have occur over the course of this next calendar year, that include specialization in things like eating disorders, expanding our providers who are trained in different modalities like EMDR and solution focused grief therapy. So some really wonderful treatment modalities that we want to make sure that we're building our staff in to be able to provide the best service possible to the folks coming in to see us. And let's see. Same things. I feel like I'm just a broken record here because it keeps going through here, right? So same things mentioned in the previous division. We've got the building rents 65201 and heat, lights and water 67002. That formula was updated. We've got a decrease in line 69901 due to COVID expenses, and then the bank service charge 69908 using the new formula. Mentioned this before, but in the capital department equipment 80080, this maintains expense authority for new server and software needs related to our electronic health records. So just tracking that very closely. Any questions on family and youth? We will move to our enhanced residential and outreach. The program narrative is on page 36 with the budget starting on 37. This is led by Chrisan Pendleton, and really it includes a vast array of programs here. It's enhanced residential and outreach programs include enhanced care facility, residential treatment facility, outreach, assistive services, and integrated supports called our OASIS program, older adult behavioral initiative, enhanced care outreach services, behavioral support services, and pre-admission screening and resident review. This budget is stable, very minimal changes. I will say, because I know there's been a lot of conversation throughout the state and certainly within different bodies that I know, Commissioner, you sit on, Commissioner Sterrett, around residential treatment facility. One thing I do want to emphasize is we don't operate the entire residential treatment facility, but we are contracted to provide the behavioral health supports within that. So we're not providing the other elements that go into those residential programs. So just a bit of distinguishing there. So as far as revenue, we have a new account code. This is 33173. This account breaks apart 33172 to distinguish from the vendor and subrecipient. As Lane mentioned, that makes it easier for central finance to track. And this includes the BSS contract that was previously on 34612. So again, not a change there, just a change in where you're seeing it show up. We're projecting an increase in state health grants. That's line 33411. Patient fees 34610 and private insurance 34611 lines were adjusted just slightly according to our variable revenue projections. Our public insurance line 34612 was adjusted up with an increased investments from our CCO contract, and also down because the BSS contract used to be reflected here. It nets an overall decrease of 189. So increasing in some areas, decreasing in others with that overarching decrease of 189. We do have some personnel changes within this budget. Again, details are in items B and C of your packet, but I will summarize here. We have added 1 FTE of an HS Specialist 1 for the OASIS Care Coordinator Skills Trainer position. This is a program that supports older adults who have generally significant behavioral health as well as physical health conditions. Requires a lot of on-site and going to their homes to provide services and a lot of case management. Also, an addition of 0.1 FTE of HS Specialist 1 to bring one of our skills trainers, case managers from part-time to full-time. This increase is supported due to the deletion of a 0.3 FTE of an HS associate position. Again, you can see this in the FTE explanation grid that's been provided to you. There's also a reclass of 1 FTE of HS Spec 2 to Spec 3, again, because they became licensed throughout this year. Then everything else is not specific to this division and carry through of our HHS department, including the change in administrative services director to program managers, the reclassifications of our care navigators to 1 care navigator to SOS, of our behavioral health OS2s to a senior office specialist, and the additional 2 FTE senior office specialists. We are projecting our extra hours, line 48000, and our overtime 48100 to remain relatively flat and stable. And then same things mentioned in the previous budget, division budgets. We're no longer budgeting on extra helpline. The beeper pay and certification and education formula changes we've gone over. And then you'll see the addition of the paid leave organ on line 49311 there. We have a decrease in professional contract employees, which is line 61025, due to the loss of some contracts that we had for some long-standing psychiatric nurse practitioners who had small amounts of FTE and have retired. And so we've been able to largely just backfill that time with our existing licensed medical providers. Contract services, which is line 61102, includes the storage of our digitized health records as well as that Relias training system. Another one that you just see carried through out the divisions throughout the budget. You'll also see the increase of 500 to 750 per employee per fiscal year on our schools and conferences line 61202. The building rent 65201 and heat, lights and water 67002. Updated formula. And then our other expenses line 69901 includes COVID expenses as well as park side invoices, which Jason maybe will just speak to a little bit more if you're interested. But the COVID expenses are overall decreasing. I will note one of the things that you will see in front of you is there was a formula error in the 22-23 budget for the park side invoices that's been updated. And so you'll see an overall increase in this line that we're expecting based on that. I don't know if there's anything else.
So your actual, instead of 45, will actually be more in line with trending to this 103,000 then?
Correct.
Okay.
We do have a $90,000 budgeted expense that we've built into this budget here on line 80202. It's replacing an 18-year-old van that supports our residential treatment facilities. It's a large van with wheelchair accessibility where they're able to take individuals out on outings, go to the grocery store, go to events and things like that. And so when talking with our public works team about do we fix it, they essentially said, I don't know that that's the best approach. I think it's 18 years old and probably time to get a new one. So we've budgeted for that in this year. Any questions on enhanced residential?
How often do we use that handicap van?
Daily, multiple times a day.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a frequently used.
I just didn't know if there's some combination that could be with Cynthia at the with transportation, because they have quite a few of those vans with handicap access.
Okay.
Could I ask you to go back to the other expenses line, because I'm not totally clear on what the changes are from the adopted budget last year was 45, now we're up to 103, and I somehow didn't quite grab what the difference was.
Yeah, it was largely an error from the previous budget that's been corrected. But Lane, is there something you want to maybe, is there anything else?
Sure, we were, yes. I think where we've been looking at, 69901, it's mostly been our, COVID expenses line. We've been seeing that decrease over the last couple years. I think when last year's budget was produced, we were looking at seeing those lines decrease overall. And we just missed that we have, this is one of the lines that we also use for Parkside invoices. So we budgeted 45,000. We should have been budgeting around 100,000. That's been corrected in our now budget and then corrected moving forward. So we are still seeing a decrease in our COVID expenses. But it's not necessarily, it's not an increase in our Parkside invoices. We just missed it in our budget period.
Okay, so the average for the last few years would have been more around the 90 to 100,000 in general. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Next division is housing and recovery supports. The narrative is on page 41 and the budget begins on page 42. This program is currently has a vacancy in its manager, but Jason here is doing a fabulous job and working very closely with Arlene Hood, who's the program supervisor, to make sure everything continues to operate. This division includes our transitional treatment recovery services in homes, rental assistance program, supported and supportive housing programs. That includes all of our master lease programs. That's Bakerfield, Aspen Ridge, and the new Sheridan project. Includes Bridges, Homeport, Sunnyside, as well as a handful of other scattered sites that we provide supported housing to. We launched the new Sheridan project in March of 2022, which is very exciting. The first half of those spaces have been are full with wait lists, and we anticipate January, thank you, Jason, January to have the second phase of the Sheridan project done. Overall, we have 127 beds or units of supported housing that we offer for folks with behavioral health challenges. And once the Sheridan project is complete, we'll have 163 beds or units of housing that HHS is supporting individuals in our community with.
January.
Yep. That is the goal at this point now. So the revenue for this program, you can see state health grant is line 33411. The 2022-2023 budget included the 2.8 million for behavioral health housing that we spoke of, and 1.5 of the burn funding. 23-24. We don't anticipate seeing any additional revenue, so that those housing dollars were one-time dollars. And we actually anticipate seeing some decrease in the burn funding because the original allocation included some startup costs. So we, of course, knew that going in and have been planning accordingly as far as our programming. In other divisions, or just as in other divisions, we've got patient fees, which is line 34610, and private insurance 34611. Lines were adjusted just slightly based on our revenue, our variable revenue projections. Our public insurance 34612 growth is again related to our CCO contract. Local contracts, line 34613, includes our DHS contract for our TTRS homes. And this amount budgeted the same that it was this current fiscal year. So we're not anticipating any changes to that. No changes to this division for personnel related matters. And the same things we've mentioned in the other divisions have carried through. You'll see the director in the administrative director to program manager, to program manager 4s, the reclasses of our care navigators, and then no longer budgeting on extra helpline, the change in beeper pay, change in certification and education, and then the new paid leave Oregon line. For materials and services, you'll see contract services, which are lines 61102. That includes our Aspen Ridge, Bakerfield, Sunnyside, and Homeport manager. This expense has been updated with our contract updates. There's a large amount in grant expenses in line 61130 that includes expenses related to the 2.8 million we received for the housing investment. Again, this was received in 22-23, but will be rolled over. Also includes some burn contract lines. So when we are expanding our TTRS programs, we also need to be mindful that we're expanding those supports that go with it. We have contracts with both Provoking Hope and Lutheran Community Services that provide in-home supports for those families. And so those contracts are reflected in our, in addition to our increasing cost if we were to start the next home. And so you see that carry through.
That's why there's such a huge increase in it.
Exactly.
Okay.
Same thing as we mentioned in previous divisions, increasing the training budget from 500 to 750 per fiscal year per employee. And that impact is seen on line 61202 for schools and conferences. And then we adjusted the formula for consistency for equipment lease. That's 65001, which resulted in a decrease for this HRS, our Housing Recovery Supports division. As in our other divisions, the building rent, line 65201, and heat, lights and water, 67002, formula was updated. And then our other expenses line 69901 have decreased because of the COVID expenses.
While we're there,
Mhm.
the heat, lights and water, of that 60 grand, what's the biggest cost? Is it water or power?
Oh, goodness, I don't know. We would
I'm
have to
just-
get back to you on that one.
Totally fine. I'm
Yeah,
just like,
yeah.
that's a huge number and I just,
We can definitely get back to you.
because I know like the fair right now, they're having massive problems because of sewer charges. And I'm almost sure just a simple phone call with Mac Water and they could just recalculate it because it's irrigation. It's not going into the sewer. So I'm
Yeah.
curious, 60 grand.
Facilities, right? Or is it mostly McMinnville?
This is for, yeah, so this program includes a lot of buildings. That's why it's so much higher here,
Yeah.
right? So this includes all of our TTRS homes, which we have six, so it's like 6 homes. It's 2 complexes that have about 15, 16 units, as well as Sheridan, which, you
Got
know,
it.
has
That makes
33
way more
units.
sense.
Yeah.
Don't
so-
even bother breaking it
Okay.
down. That makes way more sense.
If you haven't
I'm
been
thinking it's
Carlton,
a building,
know.
one building, I'm like 60 grand for one building,
You're
something's
sleeping in the
wrong.
water.
Yeah.
Those- yeah.
Broken pipe.
Yeah. We actually did have that happen and one of our accounting techs was really on it and noticed this charge. This is the second month in a row I've just seen this increase, and sure enough, we had a pipe that had broken in one of our buildings. So, yeah. All right, well, let's see. So last section here of our housing and recovery supports, we have 615 specifically allocated for the home purchase that I've mentioned with the behavioral health housing dollars. You'll see this in line 81001. And then we've also have 30,000 of miscellaneous building remodel in line 82001, with the assumption that when we purchase the home, there will likely need to be some sort of renovation that happens before we can make it work for the program.
So is that just pushing forward or is this stacking up? So was there 615 last year? Now it's another 615 on top of it, or just moving forward?
It's just moving forward.
Okay.
We're just rolling the same funds into this budget.
Got it. Okay.
So we haven't spent it yet.
So I see that it says land acquisition. However, I think what you're doing is trying to buy an actual existing structure as well. Okay.
Yeah, the line is just titled that, so that's where we plug it in.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so if anyone knows of a property, we are on the lookout.
We
You
just
know
so
that-
happen.
There was I thought a decent deal on that church, just like 3 or 4 roads over in Mac,
Really?
but it just sold.
Just sold.
It was like 500 some grand. I thought that was Pretty good deal.
Yeah.
What'd you buy it? No.
We were in.
Yeah, yeah, it sat there forever. Every time I go by, I'm like, yeah, I could turn that into
Oh.
something. Don't know what.
Something, yeah. You know, the program is really unique in that we want to have a very communal feel for the house. And so we really are looking for something that is not a sort of triplex or quadplex. We've had a couple of opportunities come up and Jason and I have really had to think hard of, do we just jump in and try to make this work? And we've decided with those opportunities, no, because we would really be remiss to remove that communal aspect of that program, which I think is a really critical part of getting folks to that next phase of recovery and being ready to live independently. So we'll keep looking. Yeah, for sure. Okay, so the next budget here is for our division, our adult behavioral health services. It is starts on page 46 with a narrative. 47 is when the actual budget starts here. This division is led by Callie Gamble, who oversees our McMinnville adult outpatient, Lindsay Alexandru, who oversees our medical team, Bethany Ball, who oversees our crisis and criminal justice diversion, as well as Tiffany, who has sort of a combination of all of those things in Newburgh. So this division continues to focus on implementing services related to the burns that we've talked about, as well as expanded mobile crisis. And we'll talk a little bit more about the expanded mobile crisis in a little bit. We had additional funding from largely our CCO contract, but also the state that has really been helping us expand both the amount of team members there, as well as the services they're providing. But jumping into the budget under revenue, we've got federal grants line 33172 and state grant 33411 combined have remained stable, but have 2.6 million in the 2022-23 and 2.7 million in 23-24. So just a slight increase projected there. As in other divisions, our patient fees line 34610 and private insurance 34611 lines were adjusted slightly according to our variable revenue projections. And then our public insurance line, which is 34612, growth is increased related to our CCO contract, most notably again within mobile crisis, and we'll talk more about that. We've got our admin services budget where you saw this, you'll see it carrying through here, which is rent, the 36204 revenue was reallocated to divisions within the adult behavioral health division. This revenue included Genoa, which is the pharmacy we have on site at our Evans Clinic, the Newburgh Eye Clinic, which leases space in our Newburgh building, and then Beerley, which is across the street. We call it our Davis building. You'll see those reflected there.
Can I ask a question?
Mhm.
On the beer and wine tax,
Yes,
how come you got that going down?
Yeah,
I think that we just take that.
yeah, that should be going up
Because it was
substantially.
going up pretty substantially, and then the adopted budget was cut nearly in half, it looks like.
Is that a reallocation or? No.
Just based on what we've currently been receiving for this year. I can review it.
Yeah. We'll take another look at that, but it's just based on the figures that we're getting. And I don't know if you. Yeah, okay. Just, I thought you were going to say something.
Does the state calculate what they send us for beer and wine tax, or is that what's sold within Yamhill County?
I think it's a state allocation.
Okay, because that would make sense why it's down there robbing it for something else. But if it's within Yamhill County sales, there's no way. I've
Right.
contributed to way too much of this.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know,
Thank
because
you.
there's two different ways that we look at trends, and I think, you know, you can look at prior years and use that as a trending tool, but then also if you see something glaring, like in the current fiscal year, that the trends aren't necessarily keeping pace to what you're seeing in prior years. And it sounds like, Lane, that's what you were saying, as you were looking at the current trends of what you're projecting to the end of this year, is why you came in with a much lower number, because it looked like that those revenues you know, even though in prior years it may have been a higher amount, but sometimes we see legislative changes, sometimes we see, I don't know, people are drinking less this year. You know, fill in the blanks that you
Right.
might see that change and, you know, so it's kind of multiple approaches that we take when trending out those revenues. We'll look at multiple years, but at the same time, you know, I would always encourage to be conservative on that side, that if it looks like you're going through this fiscal year and you're, you know, for whatever reason, and maybe we don't know why, what's going on behind the scenes at DOR or somewhere at the state. But if it looks like we're only going to collect, you know, 40,000 this year or 50,000, it'd be really hard pressed to still budget, you know, like a 90,000, even though we've seen that in prior years. And maybe it's a 1-year adjustment or a formula, but it's just something, and I'm just speaking in general about how we kind of forecast.
Yeah.
There's 2 different approaches to it, you know, looking at multiple years but then also being sure that we're looking at the current year to dates as well.
Thank you for that. Yeah. Oh, yes. Thank you. Okay. See, I think we are on personnel. We do have a couple of personnel changes in this budget. Reclass of 1 HS specialist 2 to a 3 due to licensure. Reclass of 1.425 FTE of Peer 1 to Peer 2. Those show up as on lines 40619 of HS Tech to line 40620 and HS Associate. Added 0.3 FTE of HS Specialist 3 on line 40624 to bring qualified mental health professional or QMHP from 20 hours to 30 hours per week. This increase was actually supported by the voluntary reduction of another staff member. And the timing just coincided well. Same things as in previous budgets. We've removed the administrative director position, added 2 program managers, reclassed our one care navigator to an SOS, reclassed our behavioral health office specialists to senior office specialists, added 2 FTE of senior office specialists. And then you will see again, we are no longer budgeting on the extra helpline 48200. Beeper pay shows up here, as well as the certification and education changes that we talked about, and paid leave Oregon shows up here.
It still bugs me every time we get to beeper pay. It's like $100 grand more. Or especially when you're hiring more people, you think that beeper pay, or as I think of it
Yeah.
as being on call, would go down, not, I don't know. It just seems very odd to me.
Could you look at
That's
the
a huge
overall?
amount, 100 grand.
We can,
In fact, all the beeper pays are up. This was the
yeah.
This one
The
was
largest
probably the DBT on-call requirement we picked up this year. So one of our programs at Adult Behavioral Health requires us to provide phone coaching to the clientele 24/7. We used to contract with Lines for Life for that as part of our crisis contract. They withdrew from being able to provide that specialized service with their expansion of everything they're doing for crisis work. So we had to start a new on-call rotation within that treatment team. So one of the providers is always involved with their clients.
I see.
So there was new pager pay added to that team this year.
So there was that increase. We made some notes, so we'll double check to make sure that when we did the reallocation in terms of just a different formulary, that we didn't misplace a decimal point.
Yeah, and the one part that I would add too, because even though we might see positions getting filled, you know, most of our clinicians hold the office out, you know, it's not a round the clock office situation that we have. So even with all the vacancies addressed, we're still going to have on-call expenses or beeper pay expenses
Right.
for that after hours
Right.
response.
Okay, because it's a service provided.
It is.
Right.
I'm curious, is there an offset to the increase in the beeper pay because Lines for Life isn't participating? So is there a decrease in expenditure that's not going to that organization anymore?
Yes, the contract would decrease as well. We still have a contract with them for a handful of different things, but this component would be removed, or has been removed, I should say.
Okay. And is there a place in the budget where we can kind of see, is that reflected in another line item?
It would be in a contract line, but we can definitely, as we're reviewing this, pull that out so you can have that exact figure of how much is decreased there as well.
Yeah, thanks.
So Ken, this might be a question for you, but if you go to 2021, you know, and now the projected 23, 24 in terms of retirement and medical insurance, I mean, we're seeing those numbers almost double. That's not it's the FTE, the number of FTE isn't the same, but what's the correlation there? I mean, is it that we haven't doubled our FTE?
So specifically.
Yeah.
So are you looking at retirement and medical? Or-
Yeah, just the numbers. I mean, over the past 3 years have almost doubled.
Well, there has been an increase in FTEs since that time. If you looked at 2021 compared to 23, 24, I don't have the FTE numbers for what it was in 2021, but
We can pull it up. It
Yeah.
has increased. And I will say, we also did several, the last 2 years have had several mid-year adds. In the previous year, we added several positions within developmental disabilities program. I think 8 total. And then with even just this, since we submitted the budget to you all, and between then and today, we've added 6 FTE of crisis staff. So that's reflected in the now budget, but it's not necessarily reflected in what you're seeing because there's just because of the timing of those things. So that makes it look a little strange as
And so
well.
what you're gonna see, because how those two lines are calculated, the retirement, that's PERS, you know, so that's gonna be. You know, there's gonna be a couple compounding factors. It's gonna be the number of employees, the total wages paid, and then it's a percentage that's applied against those wages is how we determine the retirement. You know, so you're gonna have a couple. One, the wages going up, that's gonna, you know, if there's a COLA increase as an example, that's. And then you're paying the 22% for the PERS against that salary increase, plus the additional FTEs. All of that, there's gonna be a multitude of factors are gonna drive those costs up. Medical insurance, that's really gonna be driven by FTEs and contributions. And so we'll see increases to the annual renewal rates with our medical insurance providers, our medical, dental, short-term disability, all of, not short-term disability, medical, dental, vision. In that case, so we'll see increases, but then you'll also it can get further compounded by the number of FTEs that we're adding as well. So from 2021, I think our FTE, you know, we'd have to look up those FTE numbers, but I think that's what's driving that, and insurance increases or percentage costs for actually both of them, that and PERS. And additional FTEs together is what's driving that cost increase that you see that's being budgeted.
Can we get to a general percentage, or is it, I mean, you know, if you have private insurance, you can tell year over year, my insurance rate's going up by an average of 5% a year or whatever.
Yeah.
Is it something that we can look at and say, in general, these are what, you know, our expenses are going up by this
And
rate?
the other part that I should put in a caveat, the number that we have for the medical insurance for this year is an estimate because we haven't renewed for insurance. We're still going through the renewal process. So we reach out to our broker and we come up with a worst case scenario, what that number is going to look like. And that's what we have budgeted. And I think we budgeted 10. No. I think a 10% increase for the medical insurance. You know, so on average, I mean, the insurance market has been a mess. Fill in the blanks, whether it's health insurance or if it's in general liability or workers' comp, the renewals that we've been seeing have been all over the map, but they're always going up every single year. So as far as an annual increase, I think we've been seeing anywhere from a 5 to a 10% increase in medical insurance each year.
Okay, and then for PERS, I mean, it looks like in 2021, we paid 7.8 and last year we paid 10.5. So.
And
Is that
if you
just-
look up, you'll see the percentages because they set the percentages for the biennium. And so you'll see that that's driven 2 ways, that
Right,
FTEs,
right.
salaries, and the PERS percentages would all drive those increases in the retirement line.
I will say, as what we have budgeted for is a 3% growth in medical and a 4% in PERS. That's what you'll see that we budgeted for. And then Lane was able to pull up some of the staffing numbers. So specific to this division, adult behavioral health in 21-22, we had 103 staff. That includes direct and indirect, just based on how we allocate people. And this proposed budget has 130. So you can see year over year, we have been incrementally adding pretty significantly. And again, a lot of that is related to crisis services. It's related to the burn funding, a number of investments that have been made largely through the state legislature.
Thank you.
Okay, now I've got to remember where we were. I think we were starting at materials and services. Yeah. So you'll see an increase in professional services on line 61001. This is due to an increase in a telehealth contract we have with the company Iris. We have historically been contracting with one telehealth provider, increasing that to two providers. These are individuals who provide services exclusively through telehealth. We use those very carefully and mindfully, making sure that the clientele that are being seen there are appropriate for that level of service, whereas a lot of the individuals that we serve do require more intensive in-person services.
So this just isn't like the telephone bill. This is actual physician or whatever that's being paid for.
It's a therapist,
Okay.
essentially.
Okay,
Mhm.
cool.
Licensed therapist working
Okay.
with clients.
Okay.
The locum tenens contract decreased by 200,000, resulting in overall decrease in the professional services, or excuse me, professional contract employees. That's line 61025. We saw this in our community support services budget as well, but it's carried through to this one. Then similar, or as mentioned in previous divisions, increasing that training budget in line 61202. Our building rent in 65201, and heat, lights and water 67002. Formula was updated. A decrease in other expenses due to less COVID expenses. And then WRAP services, which is line 69907, has been adjusted up based on our just current year trends and previous year actuals.
Did you cover building rent? 65201.
6521, yes.
Okay, and why was that one so high?
That's our reallocation method.
Okay,
So it matches. It's really driven by direct FTE in different programs. And so we're just mimicking the same allocation formula that we use when we pay into the county for
Right.
rent. and utilities.
okay. So because this department's high on FTEs, the rent's high.
Correct.
Got it. Okay.
And then, yeah, overall on that line, we're seeing an increase total because of the new public health building.
This is definitely our largest division.
Yep. Okay.
Then you'll see on line 80080, that maintains the expense authority for our new server and software needs related to electronic health record. Any questions on our adult behavioral health division? We are getting really close to the end, I promise, and then you'll be able to have lunch. This is our last division here, which is Veterans Services and Disability Services. Your packet, the narrative is on 52 and the budget begins on page 53. Our veteran services are led by our operations manager, Tracy Dawson. This program continues to file claims on behalf of local veterans and their families. We're also able to support them with things like gas vouchers, bus passes, and housing burial removal because of some grant funds that we received. Also in this division, you'll see our developmental disabilities services program. That position for their manager is vacant, and I am covering with the help of two program supervisors who are really amazing. Christina Phillips and Stacy Tolliver are doing a great job supporting the team, even with the absence of a manager. So within the veterans revenue, you'll see line 33409. The base funding largely remains flat from ODVA. That's historically the case. You'll also see state health grants on line 412 also remains stable. And we need to just really wait until the end of the legislative session to understand any impacts to our developmental disabilities budget. We received the workload model, but not the figures that actually go with how that will be supported. Once that happens, we'll make any necessary changes to the adopt budget and bring back before everyone. No personnel changes in this division. You will see the same things mentioned in the previous budget around the change in the HHS administrative director to program managers. We're no longer budgeting on the extra helpline, the beeper pay, and certification and education formula changes, and then the new paid leave Oregon line on 49311. We have some small equipment purchases on line 54301 that have been increased to support additional workstations that we've needed. As I mentioned in our last budget, we added several staff and we needed to purchase some cubicles to make sure we had a place for them to sit in the office. And then we've also increased the use of interpreter services on line 61024. This is just, I think, a reflection of the population we're serving and needing to best meet their needs through either language interpretation, including things like ASL. One thing to note here, it appears that in the previous budget on line 61130, we missed a veterans grant, getting the veterans grant in that budget in 2022, 2023. So we're using this line in 2022, 23 as we did in 21, 22. And plan to do that for this budget. So you'll see there that's why you see a gap. There was the funds, a gap, which was a mistake, and those are back. So not really a change in practice, it just looks.
So how much was it for 22, 23?
Roughly between the two right now, I think we're projecting around 7,000.
Thanks, Lane. See the training cost and budget show up here as did in other divisions on the schools and conferences line 61202. We have increased travel expense on line 63001. Staff are just traveling more. Our intellectual and developmental disabilities program had really strict restrictions that came from the state around providing in-home services. And now that those have largely been lifted, our staff are much more mobile than they have been the last couple of years. And same thing as other divisions, you've got the building rent here and the heats, lights and water 67002 with the formula that was updated. And then the decrease in other expenses 69901 due to less COVID expenses. And then as mentioned before, we've got the capital department equipment 80080 that maintains expense authority for new server and software needs for our EHR.
Back to line for advertising 64001, which is a coincidence that the adopted budget was $4,001. But anyway, it's down for the proposed budget. And I noticed like at American Legion, they have like signs out for 988 and for the veterans and stuff. Why are we going down? I think we should be having advertising out there, at least for 988 at the very minimum, but for veteran services and whatever. And I don't ever see a lot at the American Legion, which would be like the #1 spot to be kind of advertising that. So.
Yeah, I agree. I do know that we received a handful of mini grants and mini grants for us are roughly $4,000 to $5,000 that were largely related to reaching out, connecting with veterans around housing, around suicide prevention and things like that. So I think some of those offset some of those costs.
Okay. And then they'd be on another line item then somewhere. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Can we keep seeing the paid leave Oregon pop up? Do you have an idea of like total across the county, what that's costing?
And hold
No, I
your
haven't
your
done
mouth
it.
when you say it. 1 million.
Yeah, I haven't done a total on that yet.
Okay.
But it should be relatively easy to do. We could pull that. Just one of you want to take a shot at it? Thanks, Mike.
So that brings us to the end of our division budgets. I know I am between you and lunch, so I will keep this really brief and just say, overall, there are a handful of things that we've touched on that we're watching really closely that could have pretty significant impacts to either our budget or to our work. One is obviously the legislative session. We're watching that very closely to see how that plays out and what impacts that might have. We're watching and working really hard on our staff retention and recruitment efforts. As I shared, we've really seen some stabilization that's been very, very felt and very great. And we're hoping that we continue to see that trend of getting those vacancies filled, which is supportive, of course, to all of our staff, and just getting some of those vacancies filled to help with retention because folks aren't feeling so overworked. So that's really wonderful. We're watching everything happening and being very active in the redetermination process. So typically anyone that is on the Oregon Health Plan is required to go through a redetermination process every year to determine if they're still eligible for the health plan. That was paused because of the emergency related to COVID. And so beginning April of this year, OHA started the redetermination process, which means every single person on the Oregon Health Plan has to go through that process to determine if they are still eligible for the health plan. This has huge impacts to our budget if we see dramatic changes to the OHP population. Originally, the OHP population for Yamhill County or Yamhill Community Care Organization, which is our Medicaid health plan, was capped at a little over 28,000. We are now up over 35,000 members. And so we anticipate that some of those members will roll off because they are, duly insured. They now have a job where they're getting insurance, and so they're no longer eligible. So we're anticipating some natural decline in that population, but the population we're most concerned of are the individuals who are coming to us for care, who may still be eligible, but may just miss the opportunity, miss the letter, miss the chance to get redetermined. And of course, that would have impacts on their care, not only with us, but their care with anyone else in the community. And certainly because of the way that our contract works with our CCO as a per member per month would have enormous implications on our budget. So we are working really hard to make sure that that doesn't happen. We have a team put together who are working on a sort of just plan to make sure that we are catching all of those folks that come into us for services to get them redetermined, to make sure that their addresses and everything is up to date, so that we can prevent as few people falling off the health plan that don't need to as possible. So watching that really closely. I won't go into all of our different opportunities. We talked about a lot of them. There have been some pretty significant investments in both mobile crisis and behavioral health housing. We know that those two things are much needed in our community and much needed in our service array. And so we're happy to be working to be part of the solutions to solve that problem. I also mentioned our new EHR. We know that we have the consulting fees that are happening this fiscal year, and likely will have some significant costs associated with the actual purchase and of a new platform, as well as implementation and rollout. And so don't anticipate those pieces coming into play this fiscal year. We know they will the next one. And so we're trying to be really mindful of how we think about some of our fund balance or things like that, knowing that in future years, we're going to have some pretty significant expenditures that are just necessary for businesses as a healthcare provider. Okay, any questions? Yes.
How many openings is there still with HHS? Last year was like 24 or?
Well, so I will say last year, I think it was reported on that there were that many openings listed on the county website. However, many of those openings had multiple positions. So you'd see a qualified mental health therapist position open, and really we'd have 5 or 6 of those positions. So really, we had well over 50 vacancies in terms of positions during that time period. We are actually down to 49 vacant positions. And that actually, we just added those 6 positions, which bumps us up to 55, but our vacancy rate has gone from, we were hovering between 17 and 18% at its highest. We're down to 13% now. Pre-COVID, we always hovered around 7%. That was sort of typically what we planned for.
So still high vacancy then.
Still high vacancy, still, and interestingly enough, where we are seeing the biggest shift in some of those vacancies is in our behavioral health. We know there's been a lot of efforts and a lot of things going into trying to do that. Where we are seeing more vacancies and a lag are in some of our other divisions, largely our developmental disabilities programs, which are hovering with the highest vacancy rates right now. So we are working as hard as we can to advertise, to get things out there, and of course, to support the staff that we have so that we keep the retention rate.
With the tuition assistance, what kind of dollar figure is that per person?
$5,000 annually. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
very much.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
Great job.
Thank you. Good luck with the rest of your presentations.
Thank you.
You want, well, is it planned to adjourn?
Yeah, so we're past our lunch break. We're set to, the start of our lunch break, but Carolina has already have lunches that everyone ordered. And feel free, they're over in the Oak Room. You can grab it and go, or you can eat here. We're set to resume with culture and recreation at 1:30.
Okay.
So we still have an hour. We usually try to give a little bit more time to catch up on emails and stuff. So if you want to
Okay.
recess for lunch,
Yeah, we'll adjourn.
recess.
Recess, excuse me.
Yeah,
All right.
do it.